Is that working?
This is my exit.
Huh?
One for exit. That
I'm gonna reset it here, yeah.
Time. So I kept the Mankind North, and it was a better shot. And one in North is going north to south. In the evening is south to east. It's a monster.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience as everyone got settled this morning. So now we're going to start with our introduction and opening remarks. And to do this, I'd love to invite Mr. Ronnie Marty up to the stage. So Mr. Marty has been appointed to the Survivors Leadership Council. He's also done some pretty incredible things based on his lived experience. He's had a storied career in the hospitality industry. He's now an owner and CEO of his own company. And I'm just really excited to have him open our remarks here. And I'm so sorry I missed the chance to bond with you in the DR, but I'm so glad we have time now. So please, welcome.
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Great. Good morning. So how are we doing?
Great.
Sounds like you went out last night. Should we go outside and report energy? I just want to say thank you, all of you, for being here today at these early hours. I know how difficult it is, especially when you are invited by the amazing and famous Miami City. So those one of you that went out and are here today at this time, so thank you. I want to thank Free the Slaves for really inviting me to this forum. It's truly an honor for me to be here. And just to be around amazing people like you all. And when I said amazing, it's because you guys are amazing. As I said, you're here at this time, but also your commitment for the work that has to be done in the movement, anti-trafficking movement. So amazing is because I like to start with positive words, because as you know, words, they can build or they can destroy. And I choose to use positive words to really encourage and empower. That's one of the main missions that I have. So we decide what is coming out of our mouth. We can decide to use positive words to encourage others, or we can use words just to destroy. So I was reflecting on yesterday meetings and what honorable recipient, COP, we're a recipient, and she was talking about sorrow and also joy. So we are the one who decide if we want to fill up the cup with sorrow or with joy. It's a decision. I know that for some of us, it takes longer to really assimilate it and to keep moving forward, hoping that things going to change. But it's our decision to be good or to be bad, to be in that bad mood. Also, I feel blessed and very blessed because every single day I count my blessings. I'm thankful for my life, for my family, my friends, for so many things that I have, that sometimes there was a time that I felt that I didn't deserve. And I thank God for that. And I'm particularly thankful for you all that put that passion and commitment to do this work and to share information and experiences. And that's why we're here today. We're gathering to learn from each other, helping each other, and share the resources that we have. So it's something that really moved me when I see people working in this field and putting all the efforts to help others. People that you don't even know, you don't know them, you don't know their family, but the work that we put there is you impact in a way that you cannot imagine. And just to reach out to those people in a great way is amazing. So we were talking yesterday about AI and the wonderful technology, right? And how we can use it. And there was some sample that we can use in school to teach and educate kids and how to recognize the red flags. We can also use that to create communications and help us to collect data and read data in a more effective way. And just thinking about technology, you know, I'm really pro-technology. I'm pro-Microsoft, Robert. So, and anything that is supporting the system, I'm pro. So, but I know that never ever technology will replace human being. We gotta make a good use of technology. There are people misusing technologies to hurt others, to take advantage of others, but we are using technology to seek for solutions, right solution to eradicate human trafficking, and that is amazing. And that's what I said at the beginning, that you guys are amazing, because amazing things are coming from amazing people like you. So I also wanna just mention yesterday something that came up to, and just highlight about when there is no internet, what happens, what we do. You know, technology is a great tool. It is a great tool that we have to use in a good way, and that's gonna help us in everything. We gotta work hand by hand with technology, use it. But understanding that we human beings, we are the one, the mastermind behind technology. We are the one who create that, and we are the one that have to use it in a positive way to help others. So that's what I said. Technology never will replace human being, the man, the smart human being. So I just want to thank you for your support, for your dedication to this work. Thank you.
So now we call to the stand Dr. Tim McCarthy, and I've waxed poetic about him in our opening session, but he is one of my very favorite people. He's our chair of the board of directors. He's a very well-respected, beloved faculty member at Harvard, and if you didn't know this, he's currently on his first sabbatical in 20 years and still spent all night working on remarks for us. So I think we are so grateful to have Tim with us, and I can't wait to hear your remarks.
This morning. Great. Okay, that's better. That's better. I've had a bunch of caffeine, so I'm ready to rumble. Ronnie, thank you so much for those remarks and for being here and for being present and being part of the conversation yesterday and also today. It's really great to share that. You just said calling me to the stand. I was like, I'm like, am I on trial? Anyway, it's nice to share a podium and a stage with you. I want to start by saying that I am in one of those strange moments in my life where I am middle-aged and my vision is changing every day. And so I have lecture notes, but I also have readers. And so, you know, that's just gonna be a thing. And so I tell my students, look, it's gonna be awkward, but it'll still be fabulous, okay? So I'm gonna hope that that's the case today. Welcome to the second full day of the Freedom from Slavery Forum, and also the second decade of the Freedom from Slavery Forum. I'll talk a little bit about our origin and how it's changed over the years, but this is a wonderful gathering. There are many such gatherings all over the world in different places with different peoples, with some overlap, right? Trying to chart a course for our movement. And this is, as I said on my opening remarks on Monday night, this is not the work of one organization, although Free the Slaves is playing a leadership role. It's not the work of one person, me or Bukani or anybody. It's the work of a team. And I want to shout out again our awesome colleagues and friends and staff and team from Free the Slaves who's put this together and worked really hard to put together this convening. But convenings like this are important. They're special, they're sacred, and they're important. And as I said on Monday, when I think about social movements, I often talk to my students about the importance of the social and the movement, that those two things are deeply interrelated, and that we must gather and come together and convene and so forth in order to propel a movement forward. Also take stock of it and challenge each other to improve it and to make it better over time. I also mentioned on Monday, and I think this is important, I'm a historian, so I'm a historian of social movements, and I got my start doing research on slavery and abolitionism, which is something that brought me to this modern movement against human trafficking and modern slavery. And I mentioned the importance of convenings for the movements of the past, the abolitionist movements that we stand in a tradition of, but go back for many, many years, centuries. And the American abolitionist movement in particular, which was part of a global movement, had many such convenings. In 1833, there were 60 folks who gathered, white people, black people, men and women, people of different colors, creeds, classes, and conditions, who gathered in Philadelphia in December of 1833 to found the American Anti-Slavery Society, which was one of the principal driving organizations, right, that created a kind of infrastructure and energy for the movement that did a whole bunch of work using the technologies of that day to innovate creatively to pursue and promote the cause of abolition. In 1840, there was the first global anti-slavery convening, which happened in London, and that too was a really important convening where people came together from all over the globe, right? Not just the UK or Britain and the United States, but all over places that had abolitionist movements that were either just forming or had already formed, right? This was a convening that actually, interestingly, just a little tidbit about this, the women who attended this convention, this was before the formal launch and founding of the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848. So 8 years before in London in 1840, women were invited to be delegates of the convention, but had to sit in the balcony at the convention. And the American delegation, with black and white men and women who were part of the American delegation, sat all together in the balcony as a protest, but also to assert their presence, not just as an interracial and cross-class and international movement, but as a cross-gender movement that was more inclusive. But that was an iteration that then propelled another movement, the women's rights movement, to launch its own social movement, interrelated, related to, founded from, in some ways, the abolitionist movement itself, but that propelled things forward too. So in 1833, you have innovations. In 1840, you have discrimination that leads to further innovations, and then throughout this entire period of time in the United States, African American abolitionists, men and women, who were the founders of the American abolitionist movement, the most radical members of it, called for both immediate abolition and interracial equality, two things that were new in the world, that were not yet in the world, that movement and those African American freedom fighters, which are part of the long black tradition in the United States for freedom and throughout the globe, were convening every year in different parts of the country where it was safe to convene, usually in northern cities and northern places, right? They came together in what we now call the national, what was then called and then subsequently changed the name, the National Negro Convention Movement, the National Black or African American Convention Movement. This was a group of black folks, there were some white folks there, but mostly it was black people, black abolitionists, who were determining the agenda for the movement, right, that had lots of different demands and iterations and influenced the larger anti-slavery movement, the larger movement for interracial abolition, and ultimately the larger cause of multiracial democracy, which is a project that we are still really struggling with in the United States and all over the globe. So these convenings were important to social movements. And what convenings allow us to do is to coalesce, to come together, gather, to collaborate, to creatively challenge and work together, to figure out new ways of doing our work, and then to coordinate that work, right, and take it out into the world. So we coalesce and come together, we collaborate and create together, and we coordinate to do the work together in the world. And that's what we've been doing here in Miami. And that's what we do in these forums, and that's what we will continue to do. This gathering is more than a conference or even a convening. It is a gathering filled with solidarity and hope, which we've seen in abundance over the last couple of days. Also critical challenges to one another and to the larger movement and to the institutions of power and privilege, including technology and private corporations that are very much part of our movement and have bearing on it. In this ongoing fight against human trafficking and modern slavery, this is a fight that that demands that we relentlessly pursue justice in the form of human rights, to freedom, to equality, and to human dignity. And for the last decade, the Freedom from Slavery Forum, its global manifestations and its regional manifestations, right, has been doing that work. And it's been a consistent catalyst for collective action here, of course, in the United States, which is where we are now in North America, but also throughout the world. And it's changed over time. These forums have changed over time. It started in Stanford University, a small gathering of folks, smaller gathering than the American Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia in 1833. Smaller gathering of people at an elite institution on the west coast of the United States, right? And from that, it expanded, it grew, stayed at Stanford for a little while, and then it became a global movement, and then it moved out of the United States into other countries, and then it moved out of the global north into the global south as well. It's become a larger phenomenon. It's become not just global, but also simultaneously regional in every part of the globe, and that's something that my visionary colleague, friend, and our executive director at Free the Slaves has been championing. That's one of the reasons we were so excited to have him on board. He had a vision for this as part of a larger movement work, and he's executed on that as executive director brilliantly with a team of amazingly talented colleagues. Happy to just represent that and be part of it. This is also an iterative and innovative space. It's one that's constantly changing. And one way in which it's constantly changing is the expansion of the inclusion of the Freedom Forums, right? There are many more different kinds of stakeholders present here today and at all of our forums, online and in person, right, than we ever could have imagined in 2013. Right? And that has led to not just an expansion of our ranks and inclusion of more voices and more folks and more stakeholders, more perspectives. That can be challenging and messy. Democracy is not easy or neat, right? Neither is justice or liberation. But these are places where we have learned from folks who are most proximate to and impacted by the scourge of human trafficking and modern slavery. Right, we're voices of folks who have been trafficked, who have been enslaved, who have found freedom, who have made their freedom, who are now freedom fighters in their own way. Many of you are in this room today. We've heard from you, and we continue to hear from you and listen to you. Right, it's one thing for someone like me with a PhD to sit up here and talk about history. It's another thing for people who experience what history bears down on them, and then figure out a way and find a way together to find freedom, and to advance freedom, and to show us all how to do that. So this is a forum that has changed over time. It will continue to, but it is a representation of the deepening of our movement, the expansion of our movement, and the innovation and imagination of our movement. So one thing that you have to suffer through when you invite a historian to talk is that one might go to history to find precedents for what we're trying to figure out in the present. And I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer that the past doesn't reside in some dusty bin somewhere, archive, but that history is living and it's alive and it's ours for taking and also for understanding and interpreting and then using in some way. And so the relationship between the past and the present, James Baldwin always said that historians always do the work of having one eye on the present and one eye on the past so that we can figure out how to see a future. And I take that charge very seriously. I think it's very important, right? The technology conversation that is happening here, which I'm glad is happening here, is way above my pay grade as a professor and as a historian. So I'm going to play to my strengths a little bit, hope that it can inform a little bit of what we're talking about here with respect to technology and the opportunities and challenges that it presents. There's a long history of abolitionists and freedom fighters using the technologies of their moment and to forge their movement and to advance the causes of freedom, human rights, equality, liberation, dignity. The abolitionists in the United States in particular were people who were shut out of institutions of power and privilege. The legal system, the political system, the system of education, all the sort of social, political legal institutions of that time didn't take them seriously. They were radicals after all. They were not challenging the status quo. They were calling for a complete eradication of the status quo and an imagination, a transformation of their society. And so the abolitionists had to figure out principally how they were going to do their work. And one of the things that they did was they took a look at what was available to them, and they seized and took advantage of the cultural technologies of their moment in order to further their movement. When they were shut out of law and politics, they went to culture and society to build the work that they were doing. They capitalized in particular on the availability and the increasingly widespread availability of print culture and printing presses, print technologies, which were not new in the 18th and 19th centuries. The printing press had been invented in the 15th century when the Gutenberg Bible was first produced in a sort of mass printed way, which led to the expansion not only of religion in a Christian tradition, but also of ideas about the public sphere, of literacy, of ideas of democracy, of nationalism, of citizenship. All of these things were tied to, and there's lots of research on this, including mine. The printing press helped to inform and expand all of these things. And so the abolitionists understood that if they could get access to printing presses and to resources that would allow them to print and the skills that they needed to learn how to print, they could actually flood the postal ways and flood the readership of the country, right, and impact the way that people thought about things like slavery and freedom and rights and citizenship and these kinds of things. And so they took to that, and they used the printing press. Again, not a new technology, right, but one that could be used for new purposes, to found newspapers and print pamphlets and send petitions and print broadsides and books. And they used that culture of print in order to build a movement for liberation. One thing I think is important for us to remind ourselves, and this history helps us remind us that, is that no technologies are not necessarily good or bad. How they are used and who's using them determines whether or not we put a positive or negative valence on the technology itself. And I think we should remember that as we're having these conversations, because I think there's a tendency, on the one hand, to be super resistant to new technology if it's new and we don't understand it. So it's bad, scary, right? And I think there's a lot of that with respect to virtual reality and AI and generative AI and ChatGPT, right? As a professor, I fear ChatGPT and some of these digital technologies, right? We see a lot of academic dishonesty and questions about what that means, right, that are plaguing our universities. And yet at the same time, there's also, I think, sometimes too quick of an embrace of technology. It's the new it thing, the shiny new object, yay! And both that deep knee-jerk resistance and that deep fetishization and embrace of technology, I think, are the wrong extremes to reside in. Rather, think about these things critically and creatively, as the abolitionists of the past did, and that we must do, in order to make use of them in a way that is going to advance what we're doing. And so, in a sense, these technologies, print culture then, the Bible even, are what I call contested terrains, right? People use the Bible to promote slavery, and people use the Bible to promote abolition. We see the same use of the Bible in different ways for various rights struggles today, reproductive justice, LGBTQ rights, and other things. The Bible itself is not good or bad. It's to be used and interpreted in various ways for different purposes by various people. Same thing with the printing press, same thing with social media, same thing with AI, same thing with VR. These are contested things that are open to our use, our understanding, etc. One thing the abolitionists did that I think is worth noting is that they took the printing press and they transformed the culture. First, in 1835, the American Anti-Slavery Society, founded in Philadelphia in 1833, of a mail campaign where they flooded the postal ways with anti-slavery and abolitionist literature in the South. They found a way to get their papers and pamphlets and petitions to the South and caused all sorts of a ruckus. right? Southern slaveholders were like, shit, it's a growing abolitionist menace. It's a contagion, right? A threat. They were burning mail. They were burning printing presses. They were hanging abolitionist images in effigy. It caused quite a stir. And as a result of that, the federal government tried to say, oh shit, we got to do something about this. There were debates in Congress about shutting down the postal system. There were attempts to suppress mail, to look into mail. Postmasters all over the country, north and south, were opening people's mail, reading it, placing people under surveillance. All of this was happening as a result of this. The abolitionists knew it. They wanted to force this crisis and conflict. They wanted to see how the pro-slavery forces responded to this. They realized that that was ultimately tactically, strategically, something they were not going to be able to pull off or sustain. And so what they did instead was use the printing press to send petitions to Congress in 1836, the year after they did this postal campaign that caused quite a stir, and they sent 1,000 petitions to Congress, leading the House of Representatives in 1836 to pass a gag rule, overwhelming majority of people in the House of Representatives, which said that Congress would no longer entertain any anti-slavery petitions for freedom, on the floor of the House of Representatives for the foreseeable future, and that gag rule lasted a decade. Which says that you have the right to freedom of speech, press, petition, assembly, and religion, was literally suppressed by the House of Representatives and postmasters and Southern pro-slavery folk because the abolitionists used the technologies of the day in creative, integrative, and aggressive ways to do their work. And that suppression and those attacks and that gag rule grew the movement. By the end of that decade, there were 1,600 chapters of the American Anti-Slavery Society and 250,000 plus people who described themselves and defined themselves as abolitionists. As the movement went on, there were further innovations. Two of the leading genres, the most popular literary genres in the 19th century, the slave narrative, or autobiographies of enslaved people, most famously Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Jacobs, and the sentimental novel, works of domestic fiction written and published by women, first-time women authorship. Those two genres were actually bestsellers in the 19th century, outselling the Bible. Back to the Bible. Bible makes a lot of appearances. Those literary genres were new literary genres that came out of the old strategies of printing presses, but used by abolitionists for political purposes. This was protest literature, infused with abolitionist sentiment, written by abolitionist people, using the printing press to affect and inspire the public imagination closer to freedom and away from slavery. And there were all sorts of innovations that happened as a result of this. I could go on and on and on. The point in all of this is that there is precedent for the conversations we're having today. Although those abolitionists would be like, what the fuck is AI? Right? They wouldn't know what that is, but they would understand the possibility, opportunity, but also the challenges and the risks inherent in embracing new technologies and figuring out how to use it rather than be used by it. Were, I would argue, America's first culture warriors. They used cultural forms, cultural technologies to advance their causes, and we can learn a lot from this history. The theme and the conversations and debates we're having today hinge on those ancient questions about how do we use technologies that are both challenging and also full of opportunity in a way that advances our modern abolitionist cause. I mentioned that I come to this a little bit skeptical and a little bit resistant. In higher ed, we're having these debates too. And there's a lot of questions about free speech and academic integrity, right? How we borrow or manipulate the work of others in order to advance ourselves. There are lots of huge ethical questions about AI and ChatGPT and VR and all of these things that we're discussing today. And we know, because we've heard it from every person who's spoken in every panel session so far, we have heard people talk about the challenges and the opportunities. We've heard people talk about these technologies as both liberation technologies and oppression technologies, right? Technologies that can be used to help people get resources and find their way to freedom and to connect with other people in that work, but also where these platforms can become sites of surveillance, even policing or criminalization, right? And so these technologies, again, are neither good nor bad, they're both, depending on how they're used and who's using it. We talked yesterday, came up over and over and over again, the various ways in which technology can be an equalizer, can open up access to connection and so forth, to promote equity and freedom, but also the ways in which these various accesses to technology can be forms of inaccessibility, right? Can be forms of inequality, can be forms of asymmetry, racially, regionally, geographically, socioeconomically, linguistically. All of those things came up yesterday, right? And so there are paradoxes and contradictions here. We talked about the profiting of traffickers and the profiting even of private companies and corporations, even the most well-intentioned. And I'm thrilled to have Microsoft in the House and other places that are doing this work in a way that facilitates and enables and is allied with our movements. That work is really important and should be encouraged and embraced and innovated itself. And yet those technologies can also be tools for profit, and we have to talk about that. Who owns this, right? And how is it used? But they can also be, forms for the state, right? As I said, to engage in surveillance and criminalization. The other thing too that we have to keep in mind is that a lot of us are scrappy nonprofits and NGOs. We're hustling for money. We're trying to figure out how to pay our bills and do our work. And the investments in technology are expensive, and they're not always huge returns on investment. And so we have challenges, financial challenges, right? Investment decisions and choices that we have to make in the NGO and nonprofit sectors that may be at odds with, right, or in tension with the profit motives in the private sector means. Right, there are all sorts of ways in which we can think about the challenges and opportunities, the paradoxes, the both and, the freedom and the oppression that exist within these technologies, and think critically about them. Two other things I want to mention is the pace. Everyone has talked about the accelerated pace that things are being developed, they're being used, they're being marketed, the technology and the innovation and the acceleration is ahead sometimes of the movement work and of our understanding of what's going on in our world. That acceleration is something that we talked about, but we have to wrestle with and get our head around. Like, how do we make choices, intentional choices, which are by definition slower and more reflective, in a world that feels absolutely out of control in terms of its acceleration? And how do we contend as activists, advocates, organizers, freedom fighters? How do we contend with the fact that there's an increasingly small number of people, not normally in our ranks, who are the experts developing these platforms, these technologies, who are not themselves from the movement, of the movement, and sometimes not even for the movement? And that kind of expertise, which is absolutely important for the innovation and the progress, creates, I think, a challenging kind of alienation of the locations of development, innovation of technology, and the work that many of us are doing in the realm of humanity. They're not at odds, but they're in tension, and I think it's important to name that. The significance of these debates is not just an academic debate, and I want to say that as an academic who likes to debate. As we know, these are matters of life and death. Technological trends and innovations are already redefining human trafficking and modern slavery, and they have the potential to transform our work as abolitionists. But we must master the technology, not be mastered by it, or even worse, have it become another form of enslavement. As our world continues these seismic shifts, by explosions in migration, erosions of democracy, and the ongoing disruptions of an unfinished global pandemic, we must ask ourselves, how do we ensure that the technology serves as a force of human rights in a world filled with human wrongs? second day together in this forum's second decade. Let us move forward with a renewed sense of purpose about those possibilities and opportunities, the discussions we're having, the partnerships that we are building, and the innovations we're creating will profoundly impact the movement that we are all still making and committed to making. To move freedom forward, we must be the principal architects and agents of change, transforming these technological challenges into real opportunities in a world, for a world, without human bondage and exploitation. But as we do, and this echoes something Ronnie, you just said and mentioned in your opening remarks, let us not lose sight of a transcendent and fundamental fact, which is true still after all these years, that when it comes to liberation, people will always be more important than the products and platforms. Technology is a means to an end, not the end itself. Thank you so much for being here, for being part of this work. Let's continue.
Well, wow. I think we just saw a master class in why Tim is one of the best professors at Harvard University, and I just think that deserves another round of applause. Every time I hear Tim speak, whether that's for a meeting with external funders or at a board event, I'm just always so taken aback by his commitment to seeing our position in the field within the broader scope of what historical social movements have looked like. And I'm just so inspired that Bukani's leadership has led us here, where, please. You took my notes, Tim. Don't worry, Tim, no one was comparing us, you won. No need to sabotage. But it is such an honor, honestly, to have Free the Slaves at the head of this leadership for the forums, because to see this change from those early forums in Stanford to now, it's incredibly democratized and there's so many more voices at play. So I'm really thrilled that Tim's always able to kind of highlight that for us. So you know that I like to give a little bit of a personal introduction, and this next panel, weirdly, has people that have very interesting connections to my history in the field, so I hope you're ready for a very wild round of introductions. Our moderator is Karen Strauss. Now, Karen, I believe, will one day take over Tim's role as chair of our board of directors, and she, aside from working with me on the board, she's done pretty much everything you can do in this field to get elected to major office and be president. She's been senior policy counsel for Polaris back when it was still Polaris Project. She's worked with Free the Slaves even as a program director, which makes her leadership and her vision on our board of directors just so insightful, and I always learn so much from her. And even now she's at Transparentum. So she's really worked with so many great organizations here, and I'm happy to welcome her to the stage as we start the moderation for the next panel. And I'll probably keep doing the introductions as we do this. Now, the first speaker, Alex Wynn, she and I actually went to grad school in France together, if you can believe that, back in like 2010. So we have this long career, and it just so happens that we both ended up working in this field long term. So Alex is a global visionary in supply chain transparency and looking at the tools that she's created through her own companies. Like, she's the director of product development, looking at these apps to try to figure out human rights risks and labor right risks. So I'm really thrilled that she's here, and also thrilled to have a friend from Paris. Joanna and I actually worked at Walk Free back in the day. Like, Joanna and I are some of the oldest colleagues I think I have. She has led our Freedom Collective. She's really such a maverick of communication and social mobilization, and we are so thrilled to have her here in her capacity working with Freedom United and to talk about more of her digital-based movement building, which is really unparalleled. Like, I've never seen anything like what she's been able to achieve under really incredible circumstances. The mobilization of funding is such a challenge in our space that really optimizing these tools to build awareness, to build followership is just so critical. My new friend, Daniel Erm, he leads Worthwhile Wear. He's got such an incredible experience of working with over 250, wasn't 250,000 social organizations, 250 social organizations, 70,000 individuals, I believe, right? Yes. I'm trying to remember. I know a lot more interesting personal facts about Dan than the bio may allow, but one of the things that I think is really inspiring about Dan in particular is that he leverages his personal experiences growing up in the Ukraine, having all of this access to different groups of people, and he manages his team with such care. And I can say that because even in just like a very fun dinner, I could hear how committed he was to leadership development and working with his team. And also he has a colleague with my daughter's name, so obviously he makes excellent leadership choices. And then Sarah is also a new friend, but she leads the National Human Trafficking Hotline's data initiatives, which it is one of the most impressive domestic data sets on modern slavery. And it's actually the same data set I used for my PhD dissertation, like maybe 10 years ago. So this is when Jen Penrose was in the house at Polaris. And it was one of the most transformative things in my career. And I think the National Hotline's commitment to kind of increasing access through the quarterly and the national state reports has been really critical, because it's one of the few insights we've had as a field into what's happening in the US. So I'm so grateful for all of your leadership. Really, every single person here is actually like a friend. So this is a very fun panel for me to introduce, but I'll turn it over to Karen now.
Thank you so much. And Tim, thank you for the benediction. My head is exploding about everything you told us about the history of the movement, and thank you all for the opening. So are you an organization in the audience that is eager for ways to use technology to strengthen your real world impact? Not to look glossy, but actually just to make it a little bit easier to do the very hard things that you are trying to do? Whoop or a holler, raise your hand. Is there any organizations here fit that?
Yes.
Repeat the question. Are you an organization who is looking for ways to make the hard and challenging things we do just a little bit easier? Okay. Okay, so then you're in good company, I think, in the theme of this entire conference. And this panel in particular is going to look at ways that partnerships can be used to enhance our impact using technology. And the session is titled Utilizing Cross-Sector Partnerships to Enhance Technological Capacity. Davina, thank you for making introductions of the panel members, so I think I'll skip over that part. But I will ask each of them to spend just a few minutes describing your organization, your missions and programs, including programs that depend on cross-sector technology partnerships. And the idea here for this part of the panel is just to get to know each other's organizations a little bit better, and then we'll have some deeper questions for each panelist. So we'll start with Dan Emmer, who is the founder and executive director of Worthwhile Wear. And I will just say one quick thing about each person's bio, which Davina went into some detail, and you also can find everyone's bios on the panel, but I too thought it's very interesting that, and I'm just cherry picking individual facts, so these people have longer and much more detailed backgrounds, but Dan was raised in the Ukraine and worked previously in the business world, so it's coming to this with, like everyone in this room, coming to this with his own unique background.
Aaron, I'm glad to be here. This is an awesome opportunity to connect with you all, and as we look at this field of work, we're always looking for solutions. And so I kind of bring a little bit of a different perspective. We're a direct service organization. Worthwhile Wear is serving, I think you have the remote upside down. I'm really enjoying this. You're like clicking back and back and back.
Technology panel.
We'll get there. So one of the things that we do is doing direct care. And so our organization, Worthwhile Wear, we started our work in India back in 2012. And our response to the issue of trafficking in a developing country at that time was to address the kind of at the root where we were seeing was a kind of an economically driven motivator for individuals looking for work, employment, traffickers preying upon that, and then exploiting them and forcing them into situations or brothel areas. And so we started through the making of Worthwhile Wear apparel. And so that's where we could kind of provide a solution, a root, addressing at the root and providing a means for individuals to get out and stay out. And then we started to understand, as I was learning about this, as you heard, I was coming from the business world. I came from an engineering firm. And so this was all kind of new to me as I was learning about trafficking. And so starting in India was where we had a lot of open doors and started there. But then in 2014, 10 years ago, we started developing models of solutions here in the US. And so today what that looks like is we offer kind of three-prong approach, and it's connect, serve, and sustain. And so first we connect through an outreach program called Worth It. And Worth It allows us to connect with survivors in the community where they live. And so when we do this, we have an opportunity to help individuals come together that have experienced exploitation. We spend a lot of time delving into trauma, the effects of trauma, how to begin to heal from trauma. We also help connect them to good resources in their community. So wherever we host a Worth It in multiple different counties in the greater Philadelphia area, we have providers come in from their county and say, these are the services we offer. And then we also help them connect to good people in their community while also breaking down bridges. So we also have a day, this Worth It program is a multi-week program. We have a day where law enforcement will come in, and that's inevitably a day when the women they'll see the schedule in advance and say, I'm not coming that day. I'm going to be sick. I don't want to be there. And then at the end of that day, we always hear that was so impactful because my voice was heard. And so they get to meet with prosecutors and law enforcement, FBI. The other way we do that is through serving. We do this through our long-term housing program called The Well. And The Well is an opportunity where we can have women we call it foundation building, have the opportunity for up to 2 years, take time to heal again from that trauma, learn life skills, provide them with all the resources they need. Many times there's medical needs and health needs, and then building and reestablishing relationship with healthy family members. In many cases, we have individuals that come to us that have lost custody of their children and working to help them restore that. And so we have a beautiful 82-acre property just outside of Philadelphia. And then we have another property that we just opened in 2022, which is independent living, where they can practice living on their own before moving fully out of our programs. And then lastly, we sustain through providing employment. And we do that not only in India, but here in the US, providing employment through our Worthwhile thrift stores, which are not your traditional thrift store. They're a little more high-end, something that Brooke would appreciate, a little more bougie. But they're lovely stores. Sorry, I didn't mean to pick on you. You just... You dressed the part, I mean. But the stores are beautiful. They're large footprints, like a Sears. Melissa got to see when we were in renovation, so they're large, retail spaces, but we provide a lot of employment skills. And then while they're employed with us, we encourage them to get employment elsewhere, saying it's always best to get a job or look for a job while you have a job, because we share, if you're looking for employment and you're unemployed, you kind of drop to the bottom of the stack. So be employed while looking for employment, and we'll even give you good references. So that's what we do in total, and that's the direct service care that we provide through Worthwhile Wear.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Sarah Woldahana is Managing Director of Data, Strategy, and Impact at Polaris. And she's a social science researcher and evaluator with more than 20 years of experience in research, design, and implementation, which is a great background to come to us with.
Okay. So in thinking about what I want to say about Polaris, I realized that there are probably people in this room that know a lot more about Polaris. Karen was telling me the history back like, I don't know, from 2010. So I don't think I can contribute a lot to that, but what I can tell you is what we do now, how we organize our work. And so the first thing that I want to say is our theory of change says that we want to transform the societal structures that enable trafficking. And the way we organize our work is to activate partners such as yourself and others, businesses, law enforcement, all of the partners that need to be in the space by working in 3 different areas. The first one is direct response. And I think you all know about the National Human Trafficking Hotline, where we connect victims to services that they need, as well as now we also have a second program, which is in the response area, which Megan here leads and founded, which is the Resilience Fund, which is about providing unconditional cash to survivors so that they're also able to get on their feet and live, besides just exiting, which the Human Trafficking Hotline helps to. And then the second area that I lead myself is the research and intelligence. Actually, in this space, everybody talks a little bit about how we get the insights from the hotline and how that has sort of served you and when you're doing your work earlier 10 years ago. But we generate insights to drive action in the field. And a lot of it comes from the hotline, but we have also expanded that work. So, creating different data sets, which I'll talk a little bit about. But we also use, I think yesterday was mentioned the Financial Intelligence Unit, which uses data from the hotline as well as open source data to create intelligence packages to provide both financial institutions and law enforcement with information that they can use to disrupt trafficking, as well as to hold traffickers accountable. So those are the 2. And then the third piece is the campaigns and public engagement, in which we advocate and drive public policy to help build equitable and just socioeconomic conditions. And this includes using our data and campaigns, and communication campaigns, but also engaging with policymakers to drive policy changes both at the state and federal level. But today, what I'm going to focus on is our data and our journey. And I'll tell you, as I've been sort of in this meeting, I've changed what I want to talk about several times. And I think that's sort of really amazing that we're having these conversations and we're sort of learning and sort of understanding like where everybody is. And so that's a testament to that. So that's a testament to the conference organizers. So thank you. So I don't know what I'm going to end up saying, but one of the things I want to talk a little bit about is our data. So as you know, the data set that we have is really one of the most important assets for the field. We have 82,000 situations of labor and sex trafficking represented in our data set. And so that's one. But we also have, over the last couple of years, done a study of the largest study of survivors in the United States, so the National Survivor Study. So when I talk about the NSS, that's the one I'm talking about. And then we have also a data set of farm workers that you probably will talk a little bit about, or maybe not. Maybe not, okay. Please go ahead. All right. So we also have a data set of vulnerable farm workers that we pulse different surveys to understand labor conditions, but we also to try to send them resources. So that's another data set that we have. So what I want to talk about today is sort of our journey in thinking through both technological innovations, but how our approach to doing these innovations, because that's just as important as the actual technological innovation. So.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And Alex Nguyen is the Director of Product and Analytics at Ulula. And Alex worked previously at the International Labor Organization and in the Office of the UN Secretary General.
So Ulula, we are probably the second technology company in the room, nowhere near the size of Microsoft. So we are a startup based out of Toronto, Canada. We actually in our 10th year now, so we're pretty young, but we've always, our mission since the beginning has been to support the improvement of human rights and labor rights standard in the global supply chains. So we are in the labor part of the human trafficking space. And as of this year, we are now running project in 40-something countries, 80-something languages, and have reached around 4 million users around the world, workers and people in the supply chain. We are certified B Corps and all that stuff, which I think speak less about the B Corp certification and more about just where we are in the space and our value statements and how we are driven. We also have won the Thomson Reuters Stop Slavery Award in 2021 for a project in the Congo. I just want to mention that because we were in North and South Kivu and Ituri, so I'm looking at you, Kenny. So that's a little bit of what we do. So exactly what does Ulula do, right? So we are what we call a stakeholder voice technology company. We offer a set of technology that does one-way or two-way communications with either community members or workers in the supply chain, always free for them, always in their local languages, doesn't matter what it is. I think in the collaboration we have Polaris, we actually run it in quite a lot of indigenous Mexican languages. We also have share broadcasting tool that share informations. The last thing I'm going to say is we have partnerships. Well, as a private company, about 80% of our projects are with private companies, but about 20% of them are with other nonprofit organizations. And we are very privileged that one of our major projects is with Polaris. We've been running it for a few years, but we also have a partnership with Fair Labor Associations, with Living Wage for US, a certification organization here in the US that certify, employer that pays their employees living wages, and other projects all around the world with other partners. And one of them I'm going to dive into a little bit with Trade Union in a minute. That's all from me. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Alex. And that makes me realize we have a little bit of a Central Africa connection going in the room. Going back to history, when I first met Bukeni was 21 years ago in South Kivu, Congo, when we were both doing human rights work there. And our next panelist actually lives in Kigali, right next door to South Kivu province. So Joanna Ewart-James is the co-founder and executive director of Freedom United. And again, I'm just picking individual one fact from everyone's bio, so there's much more to know about them than what I've said. But Joanna recently received an Innovation Award for creating the Commonwealth 8.7 Network on Modern Slavery for the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative UK, which she chaired. Thanks, Joanna.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am so glad. Okay, I've been complaining actually that everyone keeps saying things I want to say, but I'm actually really glad because it actually helps, I think, reinforce the points we want to make. And I think this morning hearing Dr. Timothy talk about the history of the abolition movement is so important. The work that happened then is really not that different from the work that we're doing now. But what the real concern is for me is that there was an amazing effort in the real face of challenges, and that abolition movement was successful to a degree. People ask you, what do you do? And you tell them you work in this space, in this sector. What kind of response do you get? Now, for sure, it's changed for me over the last 15 odd years that I've been in this space. Often people looked at me and said, oh, isn't that finished? Didn't that get abolished? Isn't that done? So the system was actually pretty effective at celebrating the great work those abolitionists did, but to the extent that the public at large don't recognize the kind of exploitation that is all around us right now. Real shame. Even the 13th Amendment, of course, is so commonly looked at as a celebration of the end of slavery, which of course is not. Hence, I selected that particular action to describe us. So Freedom United is trying to fill a gap in mobilizing and raising awareness amongst the public. What is it that exploitation, extreme exploitation, what we might call modern slavery or anti-trafficking, trafficking for the purposes of exploitation, what does it actually look like? It doesn't look like historical slavery. That was a horrific practice. It is not the same thing. It is a transformation. We're not looking for people tied up with ropes and chains, but we're looking for elements of coercion, slavery-like practices. And our job is to build that understanding amongst the public and then get the public to be engaged as stakeholders in creating change. We're trying to build momentum for the kind of future we want, for the kind of changes that we need to see, so that we can actually have a world that's resilient to this type of extreme exploitation. So Freedom United started 7 years ago. And of course, we share the same vision that many of us in the room share of a future without extreme exploitation. But our specific role is about raising awareness, and through the platform of Freedom United, which is essentially a website, using technology, a digital space for people to come together, and by coming together, creating power behind calls for change. And a lot of our work is done in partnership as well. I think that's really important. We are one piece of the solution. We are certainly not the solution. There's some brilliant organizations, not just on this panel, but in this room and outside, who bring expertise in research, who bring expertise in policy, who bring expertise in engagement and leadership. And we want to work together as survivors and allies to bring a voice and boost that change. So in essence, it looks like a series of campaigns, a series of actions, where we can come together at a crucial moment to tip point, if you're a fan of Malcolm Gladwell, to get that change to happen. Now, we do, in our efforts, try and also make sure that we are representing a nuanced, an accurate, and an informed approach to what modern slavery looks like. And we launched Freedom United with a My Story, My Dignity campaign, and definitely encourage everybody to look at our content guidelines and just feel free to plagiarize them. They're at the bottom, they're linked on the bottom of our site, where we talk about the importance of representation, particularly of survivor stories, of images, and ensuring that what we're not doing is actually perpetuating harm, but creating positive change. Technology enables us to bring together people from all over the world in a much more efficient way than the abolitionists of the past. Thomas Clarkson used to ride his horse around the UK, speaking to different audiences and churches. Lucky for us, we can just shoot a button, and then we can send our news digest every Sunday to over 600,000 people around the world. So it's a lot more efficient. Of course, everybody else is a lot more efficient too, so we have to keep up. And I'm going to talk a little bit more later about how that technological piece plays into the work we do. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joanna. So, Dan, can you start us off? Do you see any gaps that some anti-trafficking organizations are facing that need filling?
Yes. Next question. I think for, again, bringing a little bit of a different perspective, being kind of the boots on the ground, working alongside survivors through our programming, especially like our Worth It program, we are working with individuals that are trying to find help wherever they can. And we have the opportunity through our Worth It program, we have our coordinators go out and present at service providers all throughout the different counties where we're hosting this. And that's one of the things Davina was talking about, the 250 agencies that we'll work with, and that's just current Worth It organizations, where we're presenting at DV shelters, recovery centers, homeless centers, and we're introducing what trafficking looks like, what are indicators, and then those agencies are having these like light bulb moments, like, oh my goodness, we're serving some of these same individuals, and then referring them to the Worth It program. But then what we see is these women are coming to the Worth It program, they're there for multiple weeks, we're providing all this educational stuff, bringing in these other services, and they're saying, I didn't know that these services were available to me. I didn't even know these existed. And so we have this issue of very little to no cross communication between organizations. When we hear that that feedback that they didn't know these things were available. We have, the opportunity in serving these individuals that we also want to collect information, and we do these data collection and do these surveys pre and post and during the programs and get their feedback. And I had a meeting with the Office of Victims of Crimes for Pennsylvania, and I was talking about the survey data that we have, and it would help them in kind of tracking and knowing how to better serve and who may be potential other future victims. And they basically said, we don't really know how to use this and we don't have a need for it right now. And so that was really intriguing. So hearing this type of stuff. And then, we also have this issue of how do we track progress for individuals that are going through programs, and there's limited or not many tools to help us do that in tracking their successes, and how do we communicate that to others. And so in all these different things that we do, providing resources out in the community, providing that long-term care, providing that employment piece, there's not a lot of communication across all of that. Now within our organization we have that, but when we're trying to then work and collaborate with others, there's just these gaps, these dead zones where the other organization is not aware of what the other is doing. And so we could see far more success if we had that type of communication going across different organizations. And that's one of those things I say, there's a lot of room for growth there. And that's where we're not coming and saying, hey, we have a technological solution. We're saying there's a need in what we're doing. We're seeing this need. And so hopefully you'll have some others on this panel that maybe have other solutions.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. So Sarah, can you describe how Polaris, as you mentioned earlier, operating the National Human Trafficking Hotline, how has Polaris evolved in its use of technology to analyze the hotline data?
So I'm going to do a tiny bit of history, like 10 years or 15 years. So we started operating the National Human Trafficking Hotline in 2007. And somewhere down the line, I'm not sure who at Polaris, we realized that the lack of data for the field. And we started actually reading through case notes and creating the trafficking hotline data that you all know about. And that was, I would imagine, about 12 years ago. And at that time, I'm actually reframing now after Dr. Timothy's talk. We did a huge technological innovation in a way, because we not only are reading through the case notes, but we're using the technology at that point available and innovation using something like Salesforce to actually start putting this data together. So, but now jump 2010, the number of calls that we received has more than doubled. And the number of people that we're hearing from, victims we're hearing from, I think the number right now is a 4,000% increase in the number of victims that we hear from. And at this point, the system that we created about 15 years ago, 12 years ago, is a legacy system that is just not capable of sort of meeting the needs of the field at this point. We are getting a lot more requests for insights, but just to give you like a little bit of an insight, from the time that we get a call on the hotline to when it sort of makes it into our data, right now we are more than a year behind. And it's just not adequate enough. And so you can imagine that the opportunity for using the AIs or some of the new technologies is really, really attractive. So that's sort of, and over the last couple of years, we've been innovating and we've been sort of using some of these tools to try to see how do we sort of evolve our approach to how we create the data, how we share the data with the field. And I could talk about that and actually have like a couple of articles that I can refer to you to, but I do think at this point that that's sort of not, what we're talking about here. So if you're interested in sort of like our experimentations with AI and some of the lessons learned, we can talk about it offline but what I do want to say though is, as we're doing this, we're also struggling with the approach that we should be taking. And one of the things that I realized is we at Polaris take a very sort of risk-averse approach to how we sort of produce the data and share the data. And that's because we're sort of thinking about the privacy and security of the victims that are sort of represented in this. But that's sort of also the tension there is, how do we share this data in order to activate the field, while at the same time, sort of those concerns are sort of valid. And so I think that's where I want to spend my time talking a little bit. And so how do we move away from this risk-averse space to a space where we are actually involving the impacted communities in like respecting their agency to really sort of create, I think what Megan said yesterday, like a data stewardship process, like sort of really thinking about this data, who owns the data, this is the victim's data, and sort of thinking through like what's our approach to that. And when we're using AI, it also creates the challenges that we all talked about. So what does that mean for the way we actually approach this process? So.
I think that picks up on a theme that was discussed yesterday also around the ethical use of data. And do you have anything else that you could add to that, just thinking about that discussion yesterday around your considerations for ethical use of data?
So, yeah, I think this is a truly great question. What I want to say is the main ethical consideration for the production of data is who is at the table, both raising the critical questions and coming up with the answers. So for me, the main sort of ethical use of data, in order to do that well, it's about the sort of the topic of this panel. It's about the partnerships and how do we create intentional sort of participatory open spaces so that we all can collaborate and sort of figure out like what are the questions we should be asking and what are the solutions that we should come up with. So I definitely do not have the answers today, but what I can say is I just sort of want to highlight a process that we created that sort of looks like this when we're designing the National Survivor Study. So the National Survivor Study, we started that about 3 years ago. And the reason we sort of thought about doing the National Survivor Study is understanding sort of the biases that exist in the National Human Trafficking Hotline data. Sort of understanding that biases get propagated. I mean, we all talked about that yesterday with the AI conversation. And so when we started that process, we said, okay, Polaris, at this point, we're thinking through one of our focus areas is prevention. And we really thought that the National Survivor Study was going to focus on prevention. But as we started building the space that's collaborative with survivors of trafficking with the right skill set, sort of our focus changed, because what we heard from the field, from survivors, was that the one question that was never addressed is what happens to survivors after they exited. And so we would never have been able to ask that question or think about it if survivors were not in the room designing that study alongside. But at the same time, also just acknowledging that we needed a lot of different skill sets. Survivors are not monolithic. We needed different identities, different backgrounds. So creating that kind of space really helped transform the way we approach that study. And I think we have sort of a blueprint for how you might approach sort of technological innovation in a very collaborative space so that the right questions are raised. Business community are the ones that know about like their businesses. If you want to transform how they are collaborating in the space, they also need to be around the table. So I think just creating that kind of space is really important. But more specifically, we have been struggling a little bit about data and ethics in this space. So I think we raised a question yesterday, like one of the questions is who owns the data? For the National Survivor Study, like that's a little bit simpler than the hotline, right? Like in the hotline, we are sort of collecting information that as we're in the middle of responding. So who owns that data and who has a say in that data? That's, I think, a very, very important question I don't have an answer to yet. And then another one is how do we balance privacy and security concerns against the need to share truly needed insights for the field? How do we account for the use of technologies that introduce new challenges or exacerbate old ones, like AI? How do we hold individuals and partners accountable for the way they use data? I think a lot of times with ethics, we tend to sort of focus on the front end, but I think that sometimes the harm comes on the back end. So we provide these insights, who's using them for what purpose, and how do we hold them to account? And then the last one, again, coming back to who owns the data, is what's the benefit of the data for survivors and how do we acknowledge and compensate them? And again, this is really complicated when it comes to the hotline data. For the NSS, we're very intentional that anybody who's engaged in the NSS was compensated in a very adequate way, really acknowledging that if you're coming there to provide your information, your insight, just like the person that's actually designing, we need to acknowledge that. But for the hotline, how do we do that? And so we don't have the solution. I think creating that collaborative space to actually come up with the solution is the approach that we need to take, so.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Alex, partnerships. That's what we're here to talk about. And can you give an example of a partnership that Ulula has engaged with to get information from workers to report back on working conditions and grievances?
So let me tell you a little story. We're going back a really long way, like 3 years ago. This is where, I'm not the historian in the room. We're in Qatar. The 2022 World Cup was happening. It was slightly delayed, but it's been going on the planning for it has been going on for more than 10 years. Qatar is not traditionally a football, soccer hosting kind of place, so they're building a lot of construction for this massive event. And probably a lot of you have heard of this is quite common in the Gulf, that most of the workers are migrant workers, and they have quite high injury and fatality rates, especially in the Gulf. So, and the point of the story I'm trying to get at is this is where the interactions of technology and the traditional model of, service providing is interacting in this case. So, so our partners are 3 unions. FIPRO, the global football player war union, BWI, the woodworking and building construction union, is the largest union for construction worker in the world. And then the IDWF, the International Domestic Worker Federation. So in Qatar, they have this model, they have a lot of migrant workers, and they realize, they want a migrant worker center. That's pretty standard model, business operation for a lot of us. We want to set up a place where worker can come to get reliable information, maybe raise some questions, get their question answers, and that sort of thing. However, because a lot of reason, Gulf context, everything else, there's some challenges. First things, they need a physical location if they have a migrant worker centers, and in a lot of these places, worker organizing is not the most favorable things. So they might get intimidations, they might get attack, they just might get vandalism. So there's vulnerability about concentrating in one location. There's also physical limitation, especially for domestic workers, to be able to get to the place. Second, they might get there and they might not have the person who speaks their language on site at the moment, because migrant workers speak so many different languages, especially in the Gulf. So, how do you know that day they gotta get there and get that? Third thing is people don't want to be seen in some of these places because they worry that their employer, somebody might tell the employer that they've shown up at this place. So, it's a bit risky. So what do we do? So what we've worked with them in, the unions and Ulula came up with these partnerships where we made the Migrant Worker Rights Center digital. Basically, we're providing this via an app. Tons of people have an app, so we have an app. But we're also providing the same services via WhatsApp and IVR, of interactive voice response, which is basically phone call. And the reason why we do this is workers can reach us 24/7. They basically call into this contact center, and it will be a chatbot automated response that collect the case detail that they need, edit in any number of languages that they want to have. For the current projects, we initially designed it for 7 languages. It's available 24/7. It has a protocol where they get contacted back, and they can tell us when it's a safe time to contact them, what's convenient, what fits around their schedule. Some of the reason why we do things like WhatsApp and phone call also is, especially again, to do with domestic worker. living in their employer's house, and they don't want to be seen having an app, like, because sometimes their phone gets checked. So, they can just use the thing that's already on there. They have a better case to say, oh, why I have WhatsApp, than for them to explain why they have this random app on their phone that's around work organizing. So that's some of the stuff that we do in that way of why technology is helping. But one thing I do want to highlight is technology doesn't replace the human touch and local expertise. So the point being, yeah, sure, they can call this chatbot, and then what? And the then what here is they getting, and specifically for this program, the people who respond to these questions or requests are trained paralegals. So they actually also migrant worker themselves, and they share personal experience. They have, they have the knowledge. So worker, the people who calling in get high quality information, because sometimes things like the kafala system has been abolished in Qatar, but not every worker knows that. They also don't know what that means. Does that mean that they have to ask for permission to switch employers? How do they go about that? If they have the right violated, how do they even go about filing a complaint with the government? They don't speak Arabic. How do they go about any of this? So they're getting that information from a trusted source. So these are people who have good knowledge, not just some random WhatsApp chat group, but they also are getting it from people who share their experience. So not, some high tower lawyers who give them 600-minute speech of something they don't understand. Like, what is precedence, what? So that's sort of the model that we have with them. And I think I'm sharing this story because it's a really good, I think it's a good example of where technology make the work that a lot of you already doing a bit easier, but also make it a bit easier to scale. Well, particularly for this case, because we designed it, publicity and the spreading of it around the 2022 World Cup in Qatar, but the platform's still there today. So it's continued past that event, but it also, we're taking it to other sporting events. So, the unions are global, so they're taking it to other events. And actually one of the big ones that's coming up is the next FIFA World Cup is here in North America. So it's gonna go to Mexico, Canada, and the US. And again, all these rules around changing your employers and the procedure for that, H-1B visa, temporary worker visa in Canada, a lot of the same restriction applies. And, maybe we can make it a lot easier for them. That's the hope.
Alex, and that really ties this back to the North America region, bringing that experience from Qatar back here in the next World Cup, which I hadn't thought about, but yeah, that's really good. So I'm assuming that at least one or two of those unions that you mentioned, the Domestic Workers Union or the Woodworkers Union, maybe didn't have a lot of experience using technology on the regular basis. So what considerations do you think would be helpful for non-governmental organizations or others to think about when they are thinking they might like to benefit from adopting new technology?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to speak a little bit about that experience, but also generally, because we partner with quite a lot of NGOs. So, and this is also where I'm the product person and not the salesperson. So I'm not trying to sell you on our technology. I'm just going to give you some tips or what I have in my experience around what we ask people when they come to us to think about when they think about a technology. And I'm also drawing a lot of the point that Professor McCarthy already brought up this morning. So I have 5 ideas. I'm sure people in the room might have more, and please correct me and connect with me on that. But 5 things I think I recommend NGO consider when you're thinking about adopting new technology. First thing is do your homework. You don't have to be an expert on a technology, but you take a little bit of time in trying to understand what it is, and especially, it's a little bit like picking up a power tool. You need to know how to turn it off, or where the emergency plug is, and if you turn it off, what happens? Just, give that a second of thought, because a lot of these technology make it really easy for you to pick it up, but it actually might take a while to figure out how to turn it off. So do give that a thought. And I also in the tech space, people love to use really complicated terms, but all of these things have a fairly common explanation to them, because otherwise they wouldn't be adopted. So get your head around just the common man explanation of that. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is ultimately when you are organizations and you're signing up the contract to pick up a technology, the responsibility is actually on you ultimately for the uses of that with especially the at-risk population that you're serving. And that takes me to the second point of something we do at Olula a lot, but we also recommend, in our partnerships, is human-centered design. And in this case, there's two aspects to it. Number one in adopting technology is how does this technology fit into your own workflows? So if you have a team that runs around a lot, do a lot of case services, and they're all on their mobile phone, don't buy technology that's on desktop only. Nobody's going to pick it up. Even if it's offered for you for free, it's going to be an annoying way of adopting a technology, and people are just going to complain about it. The people you're serving, so the at-risk population, using their technology. And I think this is a point about, I've had this with a lot of apps, is people, most of us have a smartphone, and we think it's pretty natural to have an app. But a lot of the actual population we have have this really low-tech smartphone. So a lot of these apps, they're really beautiful, they're really heavy and don't load. And then people can't use it. And so there's a trade-off, and think about it like, are you making it more difficult for people to actually get access to your services because you're offering it through a technology that is difficult to use? Or some people just don't know how to use it. Like a new app is a new thing you have to learn how to use. Maybe offer it through an existing tech that they're already using. And it's, there's quite a lot of nuances in local context in here, and we learned this, especially, example from the Qatar case is a lot of migrant workers have, for example, access to data, but they're changing their SIM card every week because they're basically getting whatever is the cheapest data package they can get. So they're switching provider like that. And, you need to sort of plan around some of that on fitting into how they're using tech rather than imposing the way we use tech on them. Just because, me and my friends are using tech this way doesn't mean everybody else is. The third thing I want to flag here is choose the tech that you can scale without too much cost. A lot of tech, especially at NGO, you will get a lot of people offering you things for free. But think about it down the line. If you want to scale this to different groups, if you want to grow, how much is it? And are you bought into it and you're stuck with it? So that's something to think about. Think about it like a few years down the road, not just what's cool and what's hot right now. And then the fourth thing I would want to flag is, I think like Sarah brought this up, is give a second thought to what you do with the data you got in it and what's going to happen to that. Because there's ownership and privacy issue, but also, is this actually going to be interoperable with other data you've got? Are you using a tech that's information is going to live in that one thing, and then you have other programs you can't make them talk to each other, and then you start writing really long reports or scanning the report and write up case notes. So, in some thought to that. And then the last thing I want to flag is, and this is, a little bit important to me, is choose a tech partner whose values align with yours, especially in this space. Because technology changes all the time, it changes constantly. But you need to be able to trust your partner when you ask them, do I need that new feature? Just because a technology you're already using is offering an AI features doesn't mean that you should be adopting that. Do you want that particular feature switch on? And you want to be able to trust your partner who understand your use case and understand the concern that you have, for you to trust their advice and say, not just because that feature is cool, but is it exposing me to certain things?
Great. Alex, thank you. That's very good advice. Thank you so much. Joanna, Freedom United recently acquired Human Trafficking Search. So I want to ask you a similar question. What were some of the considerations as a digital-first nonprofit that you had, and how might they apply to other organizations?
I think I've got a slide. Is it there? So I don't know if you can read it, actually. It's quite small. There are so many organizations in our space. I just constantly surprised to find out that I actually don't know all of them, even though I've worked in it for a long time. And one of the things that we often hear is, you guys should work together more. Like, are you collaborating? Funders often aren't interested in this. It's like a joint application. And, I think we often say when we're at these events, we're going to collaborate. And then, we get back and it actually proves to be quite difficult. And this is a really interesting experience that I'm going through at the moment since human trafficking search came under Freedom United. Because actually, in this case, these are two brands that I actually have control over, but I'm still facing challenges and working out how to really integrate them. And I think that is symbolic in a way of some of the challenges that we experience. We're both organizations that are about raising awareness and sharing resources and information. Human trafficking search gets a lot of traffic, and so the thinking behind the partnership is to be able to leverage that traffic and turn it into supporters, which means more power for us to direct that interest and engagement behind specific campaigns so that we can create change. So that's the little drawing on the slide. So we're both using what we call digital real estate out there. So in a way, you say that would enhance that technical reach. That technical sort of real estate increases our reach. So we should be, and I think this is obviously the case for all of us, we need to find ways to complement each other and not to compete. And it's difficult because we obviously both have Google Ad grants, so we're both applying for the same adverts. So there are real challenges to this. But I think one thing that we have to remember that we have heard already over the last 2 days is that technology is about accentuating your work. We have to stay really focused on what the mission is. I often say if it's better for Freedom United not to exist, to have more impact, fine with that, absolutely. But we have to say two things. We have to keep a real focus on what our core mission and objective is. And secondly, in the context of this discussion on technology, it's accentuating our work. You have to educate and be aware. 100% agree with Alex. And I think Brooke gave us a good example yesterday when she talked about the problems of control when technological partners sell their products to you and they hold the data. And of course, they control the costs. So 1 minute you might be paying X amount. I just had one of our software write to us and say they're doubling the charge. What can I do? And no extra feature that I could see. You do need to know something about it. And I think, one thing you can do, because I will plug Freedom United, and you can, on our news page, you can filter by technology. We have over 100 articles where you can find out about some of the latest developments in technology. But these are the reasons why we built our own technology to engage people. We have a database, obviously the website, email building platform, servers, what and what. And I counted that we have about 44 plugins and pieces of software. And I mention this because technology is actually expensive. And I think we have to factor that into our costs. And we probably spend quite a low amount, I'd say probably about 20% of our budget on tech, which is actually quite low. And I think the reason it's so low is because we're fortunate to have quite a lot of pro bono help. Probably if you costed that in, it'd probably easily be over half our budget would just be on tech. There are lots of things, there are lots of software that's available that you can get for free as a non-profit. Things like Canva Pro, of course, Microsoft, as we know. And I think you ask, we went in 2022 when we were really struggling with our income, and I know that lots of other organizations were really struggling with the economic climate and the impact on donations. We literally called all our vendors and were like, can you give us a discount? We're a non-profit. And there are actually quite a lot of options and offers out there that are available. So do ask, do see what's available. And then there's things that you do really need to think about in how you're ensuring you are reaching out to your target audience in the best way possible, that I think is really applicable in any context. So things about your search engine optimization. Are you using the right meta tags, using the right headers in your content? Another thing that's really, really, really important, but very tedious, so it's always hard to get people to do, is to make sure that any content that's added has alternative text. So anybody who's using screen readers, etc., can really follow along with what they're seeing. Also, metadata, so little descriptions, and then your name conventions. There's a lot of things to really think about. Backlinks, what are they and where are they? And I think this is, it's important again to understand your technology to an extent. I think Alex is right, you don't need to be an expert, but to understand it to an extent to make sure that what you're doing is helpful and not harmful. So I think those are some of the things that I would recommend that are useful, things that I've had to consider and look at that I think also apply in other contexts.
And Giselle, I don't know if it's possible to turn this off, or I bet Dan can help me figure out how to turn off the slides. So we can turn on the lights, because the light went off and I wondered if that was my signal to get up and do a dance because the movement camera wasn't working, but I think someone kindly turned it off so we could see the slides. So no dance, sorry about that. I do want to bring it back to Dan, who started off the conversation talking about gaps. And based on this discussion and your, everything we heard yesterday, also, has it made you think about any ideas for how some of those gaps might be filled?
Yeah, thank you. Keeping an eye on time, I want to keep my answer very short. I think the beauty of this type of setting is that you get to hear of different solutions. So client management software, that's something that we're looking at in our housing program. One of the things we started about 2 weeks ago is looking at Brooke's solution called Coming Home to help us kind of track successes, track things that then cross over to an app that is serving your clients directly. They're able to utilize and see those things. So that's a great tool. We're looking at, Freedom Signal is something I learned about here, and that's a great thing because our Worth It program, we're always trying to find how do we connect with the women in our community to be referred to this agency. And so meeting with that team from Freedom Signal and Rochelle, that was a great system to learn about a potential tool that we'll be able to utilize. Tyra, Melissa is working on, I think it's a nod to Tyra Banks, possibly. No, it's basically the Airbnb for referrals for individuals, clients to find a housing program. So technology is serving all these areas. There's others out there as well that I'm aware of. But again, keeping my answer short. One thing though, I see that an area for improvement, and our team is working on this, doing some investigative kind of taking a page from the book of the medical community. My last name is Emmer. Don't let it be lost on you. EMR, Emergency Medical Records. So I'm learning from my last name. Emergency Medical Records, one of the things that they do in the medical field is have what's called interoperability. So that cross-communication, what we were talking about, lacks in our field. And so that's something our team is currently working on as a solution so that that cross-communication will happen and be more available to everyone. So that's my short answer.
Thank you, Dan. And I think we have about 5 minutes for other questions. Just to start that off, and then we'll come Brooke, but I want to ask a question that I think came up yesterday, and so I think a lot of people are probably also thinking about. What are do you have either very quickly an example or recommendation for ensuring that people's lived experience is strongly informing the technology partnerships? And I want to ask Joanna and then Sarah really briefly, very briefly, to talk about, mention that, and then I want to turn it over to the audience in case they have questions. And I see one already from Dr. Brooke.
Okay, very quickly. Technology is a means. We heard it already in the opening remarks this morning, but it is a means, which means to say that if your work is not properly informed by lived experience, then of course your technology is not going to be properly informed. It needs to be across your work, so not just an add-on, and that a failure to do that will definitely play out in the technology work. So, our biases being supported and perpetuated, our minoritized groups being further marginalized. And we've already heard about that yesterday in reference to artificial intelligence. So I think we have to consider, is it relevant, this technology? And we heard that in Alex's contribution, is it actually accessible? Is it harmful or helpful? Where's the real value add, I think, for the people that you're trying to serve? Are we gatekeeping through technology? I think that's a real concern. So we have an option on our website where you can create your own petition. So, we really want it to just be a platform. It's free to use. You're welcome to either partner with us or create your own campaign on there. We've got a campaign that we're hosting with National Survivor Network posted, and we have another campaign from the Domestic Worker Alliance Network. Lucy, that I think some of you know, Lucy Touray, spoke very powerfully about how having the support of people through the petition just gave her strength when she was in Lebanon trying to fight for domestic workers' rights there. So feel free to use it. We need to really think about how we work with lived experience throughout what we do. And there's some brilliant guides out there. I think the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery and National Survivor Network guide on meaningful survivor engagement is super helpful on that. And you just apply it across your work, including technology.
Thank you. So it sounds like individuals themselves can create content as well through your platform, which is great. And I think it's a question for all of us to always be thinking about with every program, how are people with lived experience actually co-designing, not just being thought about in receiving services, but co-designing the program. Sarah, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize what I have been saying from the very beginning, which is whatever the endeavor, whether it's about technology, I think eyes on the prize, and it's a tool. But at the end of the day, whatever the project is, it's everybody who has a stake in the problem needs to be in the room. And that means survivors centered, but it also means all of us, whether it's funders, the people who have resources, whether it's the technologists. Everybody has to be in the room in order to come up with the right solutions and just sort of ask the right questions. So to me, I think it's really critical to think of this as a very collaborative process, just because otherwise, the change is not going to come. We're not trying to change survivors. We're trying to change all of us who sort of contribute to the problem. So
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. Thank you for such an incredible panel. Thank you, Karen. My question, the work we do at More to Life all these years, what I didn't say yesterday, is really all around identity discovery. Identity that's lost or never discovered. And as we set up the narrative conversation later on, I consider all of you thought leaders and critical thinkers. One of the sort of gifts that's being lost, especially when you get past trauma. And one of the statements that whenever a survivor is in the room, you're looking at someone who you have no idea is standing before you in their right mind and the hell they went through to be present, something extraordinary. The narrative issue, and here's the question, is a lot of survivors of sex trafficking not feeling as though within the narrative that the singular aspects of their plight, or even someone that's labor trafficked, is being presented. But to broaden the scope of and push the movement forward, as Bukini and Bryon brilliantly did, is looking at the narrative around climate change. What do you think about, with all the things you're thinking about, look at around this collective understanding that freedom from slavery and undergirds so many aspects of all individuals in every variant of the movement? And what do you think about the idea of how we narrative so that everyone feels incorporated, but broaden the narrative so that the whole world can really begin to understand, because I believe that the whole world in some way, individually, is coming out of some impact or of bondage and would like to. So do you understand that question?
Whole panel we should have. I love the question.
We're going to talk about it later, but.
Great, that's great.
Well, I'm not sure if I completely understand, but the idea of collaboration, I mean, the reason why we all have a stake in this, I think that's sort of what you're talking about. And sort of the theme of what I also feel is really urgent about the way we approach this problem. So I think that's what you're talking about, but yeah.
Honestly, this is a massive challenge. I mean, for the most part, you know, there's a small group of us talking about this issue and we're talking to the same people and we've got a real problem here, right? Like, this is absolutely what we need to do. I 100% agree with you. And I think one of the big problems is with our sector is, honestly speaking, an absolute lack of empowerment. Like, there's just not enough acknowledgement of actually the solution here is empowerment. If people were properly empowered, then, okay, some people would not even fall victims, and others who have been victims or surviving would be able to focus on their recovery, and then others who want to would be able to lead as activists, but they're too busy trying to deal with some kind of criminal offense on their record. They're too busy trying to work out how to survive, how to get housing, how to get work, deal with immigration. And these things are holding us back in a massive way because we're not dealing with some of those root causes. We really need to say that this isn't just some kind of criminal aberration. This is a systems issue, and that we need to deal with things like racism. We need to deal with things like anti-immigration, how lack of safe migration is actually perpetuating this exploitation. And dare I say it, controversial perhaps, the capitalist system, the drive for profits over people, over the planet. These are some of the things that are actually making us sort of confining our work and limiting our ability to have the kind of impact we need if we're going to be successful, as you described, in my opinion.
Last burning question, comment? All right, yes.
And I'm pretty sure after this forum, we're going to go back and review our forms for privacy, right, about data. And you, Lou, you have mentioned challenges that you have with people that you work directly. But what do you do with those people that don't have any knowledge about technology and they feel forced to understand what we are telling them? But what resources do you use for someone that feels like providing information with the new technologies will affect them in a way that will create a trauma in their head? But how do you deal with that? But with people like, they feels like, if I don't say yes, I'm not gonna get the services, or probably they don't know what you're saying because they lack of knowledge. So how you handle those situations with those people?
Talk about anything that's used to help workers have more trust in those systems when it might be something that is not familiar to them and you're working at a very large scale. So how do you build trust across that large set of workers?
Yeah. So it's just a few thoughts on that. Thank you for the questions. I mean, we don't have all of the answers, but some of the things we've done and try is we upfront. In context, and actually a lot of, it happens more than you think. Mostly people around the world have access to a mobile phone, but actually a lot more of them don't have access to a smartphone. More people than you might think. And actually we encounter this a lot. Is people have access to a mobile phone, but not a smartphone, or not data. They might have a smartphone, but there's no data on it. Or like data once a month. So assumptions of people having access to internet is a bit of a risky thing. So we make we always, when we run our program, we make sure that there's always an online and an offline channel, so people who are offline still have access. First thing. Second thing is, I think the point around user, human-centered design. How are they currently using technology? And I think we think about technology as things that are internet related, but electricity is technology, right? Like the tools around the house is technology. So just what technology do they have and they're familiar with and how they interact with it? Some of it is to do with people are familiar with call into radio stations and the conversation that way. So we try to mimic some of that in the interaction we have as well in terms of the chatbot, like, people calling to a thing and get a sort of thing, respond, or like how they calling the service provider, press 1 to do something. The third thing is technology-wise for us, our programs is anonymous and free by default. So we make sure that it's not a cost thing for people to actually pick this up, but also that they have the right and the control and they know that they can stay anonymous for as long as they want. And it's always like we don't gather any additional information that is not necessary. And I think there's a principle around gathering, making sure we only gather the minimal amount of information needed for the step that we are in that process and nothing else.
I'll give a really quick answer. We kind of do it a 3-prong approach. Is first meet them where they're at. So we'll have a class where you have individuals that have no understanding of technology, others that have a proficiency in it. And so we provide them old school. You can have a form or you can have the link. We also work to provide them the tools that they need. So at the end of our Worth It class, we have the opportunity for them to receive a free laptop. We have a partnership with a global agency, our organization called Click. That is a tech data company. They give us free laptops, refurb them, and we donate them to the women. And then the other thing too that with this is that you have individuals that you give them options, right? So that they can decide for themselves what works. And that's how we kind of address those variety of needs.
And that concludes our panel, so I will hand it back to Davina. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you. That was an excellent panel. And I think that leads us into our workshops beautifully. So as we might realize, we're running a little bit behind schedule. So we have some strategies to get us back on track. So you'll see that we have 2 sets of concurrent workshops next. What we're proposing is that each workshop will be 45 minutes. So we're shortening that time a little bit. And the transition between workshops will now be a working coffee. So grab your coffee and teas on your way to the next workshop. What we'll do is instead of doing the reconvening and doing the readouts between each workshop, we'll actually do that after lunch. So you have a bit more time to kind of think and digest about it as we literally digest and actually just work it through in our lunch convenings. So what we'll do is that we'll have the Stakeholder Engagement Collaboration on an Ever-Changing World workshop. That's Tanya's workshop will be here. Let me just confirm that I'm getting the rooms right. Yes, Tanya's workshop will stay here. And then Kate and Mark McDonald will be in the coffee shop, the coffee room. They'll be discussing evolving investigative techniques using AI, a law enforcement perspective. And just a little plug for this, I actually remember reading the article about the case that they were collaborating on in Calgary in 2021. I thought it was such a great example because in the US, we've worked with the Bureau of Justice Statistics and NIJ on their enhanced collaborative grants. And I thought that this was a great example that kind of highlighted how important it is for law enforcement and service providers to be working so closely. So just a little plug for their content as well. And then exactly at 11:30, we'll make a little announcement kind of wrapping up each of the workshops in each room, and then you can transition to the next workshop, which we'll give you a little reminder then, but just so you can mull it over now. Bryon and Sandra will have their workshop here on digital and organizational literacy. And then we'll have Melissa's workshop in the coffee shop room. So we'll give you a little bit of a reminder as well in between, but I didn't want to be too disruptive as we're transitioning. So these are our marching orders before lunch. Enjoy your workshops, everyone.
Yeah.
This.
I think the mic likes me.
We're gonna chat.
Yes.
There it is.
Which is how we like it.
It is. Elaborate, have different opinions, is really to emphasize how to engage stakeholders from multiple sectors of the anti-trafficking field through the lens of
all over DC, but I loved it because I'm a hands-on person. She's like, we gotta go here, we got 15 minutes, we gotta go here, and I loved it, I thrived, I didn't know that would be my, so I did that. And I learned so much, but I was also hungry because I felt like,
Or healing journey, not in the context of being a survivor, but in the context of being in the anti-trafficking field at large. For all of us here, recognizing that to be in this field in an authentic way means to empathize with each other, whether that's empathizing with a fellow survivor, empathizing with an ally that's really struggling with the season that they're in. And yesterday, I kind of was touched so deeply. We were talking about road trips, and I hate, is it okay that I'm talking?
And look, yes. And that's what we wanted. We wanted it to be a talk show feel. So I think we're doing great.
Talk show. Yeah. Yesterday we were talking about road trips, and I hate road trips. I would just rather fly somewhere, get there. I'm constantly on the move, and my brain is constantly spinning. I'm a classic workaholic with being a mom, whatever. I can't be quiet. And I said to Tanya, Tanya, you like road trips. What do you do while you drive? And what did you say?
Nothing. I love the quiet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was like, it like took my breath away. And I said this to you immediately. I was like, Tanya, that's such a beautiful indicator on your mental health status, that you can be in a moment of quietness for hours, and it doesn't inspire anxiety or anxiousness. Your brain's not spinning. And for all of us, like if there's one thing that all of us could take away from this entire conference, what are things that you've done in your life to be in a place where you can take a road trip and be quiet for hours? It's so inspiring.
Yeah, no, I just, I know who I am. I just know, and I'm so confident in who I am. And I want to continue to become that, right? And so, but when you were talking, you reminded me of, oh my God, it was probably like 20 years ago, or no, maybe 13 years ago. I was in Amsterdam, and I met with this woman who she was with like a Methodist mission group who for 30 years had done so much work with, victims and trafficking when no one knew about it, type of thing. So I just happened to see her when I was there because I was working with organizations trying to just understand more about international trafficking. So we're having coffee and we're sitting there, and she's just like looking at me, and she was like, how are you here? Like, how are you doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm just, I just want to do this. This is my passion, blah, blah, blah. And then she starts crying. She's like weeping. And for her, it was about 4 years. She's been doing the work, quietly behind the scenes, working with survivors, working with victims, just doing the work, and never got to see wholeness and what wholeness could look like, right? Like, I got to give that to her. Like, that's just powerful. And so for me, it's wanting to, I love the place of joy, right? Because there was this cup of sadness, right? And I'm looking forward that it was like overflowing. The sadness was only you felt the sadness, right? I want you to feel the joy, right? I want it to be that much. So I know that there's still more, but that's what I want. Like, we all know what we want. Like, at Starbucks. I still go to Starbucks. I know there's controversy there and all that. I know, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, but it's the only constant thing in my life. So green tea, matcha, matcha, blah, blah, blah. But my point for that is, I forget what that was. I don't remember what my point was. But things are consistent.
But her having an example of wholeness and giving her that.
Yeah, I don't even know why I brought up Starbucks. I haven't had it in 2 days. I know I was getting somewhere with consistency and something, but yeah, I'll come back.
Yeah, we'll get there. Yeah,
We'll get there.
I think you were talking about how we know what we want.
Yes. Oh my God. Thank you so much. Yes. So when we know what we want, right? Like we go after what we want. Like if it's a man with great teeth, you know what I'm saying? Or whatever it is, we go after what we know we want. I know that I love who I'm finding, who I found, who I'm finding, and that is what I want. I'm going after it. No one else. Why would I expect a man or anyone else to go after something that I'm not willing to go after? Right? So it starts with me. So I'm chasing and pursuing and going after me and loving the things that I find.
And Tanya, you have chased being healthy. You have chased. Tanya believes in essential oils.
I said, you don't have to believe in essential oils for them to work.
But in all seriousness, like you have intentionally, I might even say aggressively sought after mental health. Yesterday, you were so vulnerable in your presentation, sharing that there was a moment that you're looking off the roof of your building saying, I'm exhausted. I can't see a future of hope. And that's not the Tanya that we see today.
Oh, yeah.
And I would love to hear for all of us that whether we're struggling with vicarious trauma, whether we're struggling with close to burnout or we're in the midst of burnout, we're all here because we've been in the fight for a long time. Yeah. How did you aggressively go from sitting on that roof saying there's no hope for a future to who you are today? Because I think we could all agree, you are so inspiring for all of us.
No, I appreciate that. I know the hard work it took to get here. Yeah. And that's what it takes, right? It takes work. And healing is difficult, right? Healing is just hard. That's why people don't do it. That's why people stay stuck. That's why I get it, because I'm a person, I'm not going to ask someone to do something that I'm not willing to do myself, right? So if I'm asking you to heal from your spaces, right, I understand. I get it. I know that's difficult work. That is just what it is, right? And so I don't want to stay stuck. I want to keep growing. I used to say, so I'm a person who writes things down because of trauma. I can't remember some really great things that I need to. I cannot memorize them. So I have key things written on my mirror all the time, and I change them out, every so often. So every day I'm repeating things that I want it to ring true. So, and that's the question I ask myself. I will say this until this begins to ring true throughout my being, throughout my cells. I want my cells to begin to replicate, what I'm bringing in, right? And so, and it's all, to me, for me, in my healing journey, that's what it's all about. What am I bringing in? Because what I'm bringing in is what I'm going to give out. Right? What I'm taking in is what I'm going to give away. Right? And so I'm constantly doing that. I'm constantly finding ways. And, think about it. My abusers, my trafficker, they were aggressive to tear me apart. They were relentless in their pursuit. Right? And it continues to be this way. People who want to oppress or find vulnerable people, they're aggressive. And, I would say, this is my motto. I have a ton of mottos, but one of them is, if you can dish it, you can take it. give me something, I am great with giving something back. I'm okay with that, right? And so, when I think about that, all that my abusers through my entire life, what all they gave me, they will be okay if I tell them off. They will be okay when I heal. I am coming after you. I'm coming after you, and I'm doing it aggressively, right? And that means I'm making sure that I aggressively pursue myself. I would think about, my trafficker obviously saw something about me that he thought was good enough to exploit. See that, right? Which was a vulnerability. So yeah, who's going to exploit me now? No, I don't think so. I may let you think you're exploiting me, but we will be having a conversation, right? So.
Speaking of survivor exploitation in this movement, you have sat at a lot of different stakeholder tables. The White House, State of Virginia, National Attorney General's conferences, United Nations, all of those. I'd love to hear from you, if you wouldn't mind, what are tables that did it well? Is it about it that made it?
I will say it may not have looked well, but I base it on forward. So one of my best experiences really was at the UN delegation in Vienna. And of the concept of a consensus, because that means we have to meet people where they are in order to move forward. And I just love that, right? Because that means we're gonna move forward, and it may be a little bit, but everyone is in agreement, and we all have to, when you talk about the weakest link, we all have to figure out who's the weakest link, because whatever this discussion wherever it comes to, we're just gonna have to meet that where it is, even though we all may be well advanced and we're all here, but since we have to have a consensus, we're going to have to meet them where they are, because this is where they are. And that's okay. And so we, talk about this with the State Department, the experience there, because, I don't know, some people are like, who do you think you are? And I'm like, who do you think I am, right? I know who I am, but who do you think I am? But, so they were having a discussion, you have, like all these countries in the room, and they are trying to get past the word survivor. And so they're trying to understand, and I realized that, so I'm not offended, right? So we had to get to just what's going on in your minds, in your language about the word survivor. And so we started having a conversation, right, in the delegation room. And we were like, I'm like, this is so cool, right? To be a part of this conversation, this is something they've been talking about for a while, but they never had a real conversation about the word, the language. And so come to find out, when you translate it in other languages, it means something different. I had the advisory, the council, our reports. I had them with me, and I'm handing them out to everyone to say, there's, information about language in here, just so you can see that we're not crazy. We're actually listening to survivors, those with lived experience, to make recommendations to our government. I mean, it was just a great conversation. And that conversation we had that day moved the needle just a tiny bit internationally. And so to me, it's not what maybe people want or I want, right? Like I want to have a big jump, but when we're talking about the world, when we're talking about, the way people are thinking, to be able to move the way people think about something is just beautiful to me.
Yeah, and I love this idea of having dialogue about sensitive, complicated, potentially offensive topics in an environment where there's a posture of learning, of listening, of grace. Because if they had not felt comfortable asking you about the word survivor in fear that it would be offensive to you, that conversation wouldn't have happened.
Well, I probably would have found a way to have it anyway, but you're so kind.
Get it done. Get it done. That's
playing.
awesome. Yeah, I love this concept of authentic collaboration that leads to consensus, which is, we all know, is hard and, let's be honest, is inefficient. And I think that if we could be okay with being less efficient, and this is especially coming from like American perspective, right? Like we're all about outcomes, deadlines, moving things at a fast pace. And for this movement to be, and please chime in, but I just think if we're really going to truly incorporate survivor experience, if we're going to really incorporate authentic empathy for our fellow anti-trafficking leaders, we've got to remove this concept of efficiency and bring in this concept of consensus.
Yes. And thinking about how are we, the work that we're doing, is it long reaching, right? Is it really impactful in a beneficial way? Because we have a lot of work to do, right? So understanding we have a lot of work to do, but it's like other things in our society when we are, for an example, we know that fast food is not healthy, right? But we do it anyway, right? We know there's a lot of things that we do. It's not beneficial, but we do it anyway, right? I, as a survivor of human trafficking, I don't want this to be that way. I don't want this to be, we know this is not okay, but we move on anyway. We do it anyway. And so I am always the cautious one in the room who kind of pulls back to see where are we so we can pull it back and then move a little bit more, right? Pull it back. Okay, it's great we went there, but come on back, guys. We haven't gotten, no, let's come back. That's me. And that will always be me, because when we're talking about root causes and we're talking about, or is it demand, or is it this, or is it, I just a little soapbox maybe you all can use. When people are like, prostitution is the oldest profession in the world or whatever. And I'm like, no, farming is. And then, we actually have a debate, about, is it farming? Is it the chicken or the egg? Like, this is not even comparable. I mean, like, we're talking about a desire and a need. What does that tell me about our society? That we don't know how to separate the two. Question about this. That's the person I am. This is where we are as a society, because we're still saying things like that. Boys will be built boys. No, I raised my sons to be protectors because they're going to be fathers one day. They're going to be teachers. I didn't raise them to stay boys. Oh, we got to pull it back, and we have to, talk about some of these things that we just do it and it's not right, and we let it go and we just do it to do it, like we do with fast food or anything else. And so in this movement, you're going to always find me doing that, right? Great to have these conversations, but what are we missing? Because this is why we haven't ended slavery. Because we get on this bandwagon and we move forward and we don't bring it back. To me, that's real, meaningful conversations. That's real collaborations. That's real partnerships. And that's where I'm going to come from. So,
yeah, I love that. Being mindful of the time, I want to ask if you would just wrap up, what is, and I know this is a...
Well, I didn't know if anybody had questions too, because we did have a question, so.
Finish, and then we'll do Q&A with, what are you the most hopeful for in where you see the anti-trafficking movement headed?
Honestly, I want to see, I would love, which I believe is happening, but sometimes I lose sight. I would love to see survivors of human trafficking be the group, and this is probably my ego, and so I'm really sorry, and I'll check it. But it would, just to be honest, I would love, human trafficking to be the group, like all of us who are survivors from this like horrific, terrible, ugly thing, to be what moves the entire collective consciousness of the planet forward. I would love that, right? I mean, I would just love to be a part. That would just be so good, you know? So yeah.
All right, well, let's do questions until we are asked to close out.
First. No, we're backtracking. My focus wasn't on healing. It was just on being a mom, because I was a single mom. And I didn't want my kids to have kind of the same story that I had. And I didn't want what I went through to be their testimony, right? So that was my motivation, to heal in what ways that I could while still working and paying the bills. And I did okay. As I got older, you know, going through those situations, or the situation I went through, and even as a child, I was horrible at like picking a husband. Did it twice, divorced twice type of thing. But then I just did my best, right? And because I wanted things to work, I knew that I had to do something. Like I couldn't wait for, I remember I was on social services, and I was trying to like build my home, you know, sometimes you get vouchers, you get all this stuff. And it was such a struggle. And I remember sitting in front of my social worker, and I was trying to get some more like some furniture, like a washer and dryer, something like that. And I said to her, I learned from a friend of mine that you can like help with some vouchers for furniture. And she was like, oh yeah. The struggle, what I've gone through to get here, and you're just like, oh yeah, you had it the whole time. I leaned over on her desk and I told her about herself and how this stuff doesn't belong to her. It's for people, and it should not have taken all of this just to get services. But it also, for me, was like, I'm gonna need you to be out this type of situation. As a leader of your home, to get it together, right? I'm gonna need you to use this as a catapult and a platform to get you and your family where you need to be. And that's where I began to really focus on myself, you know, and really focus on how I can be a better mom, a better citizen. I wanted to contribute. For me, I felt like I was taking, right? And I did not want that for my kids. I wanted my kids to know that they are contributors to a society. And I wanted them to see me do that so that they would have an example. So I would say, you know, wanting something different for my kids led for me wanting something different for my life.
But also what I hear through that is you finding your voice and becoming an advocate for yourself,
absolutely,
for your kids,
absolutely,
and now for so many people in the anti-trafficking field. And that was a big part of your healing as well. Yeah. Finding that agency is
empowerment. I just want to say this one really quick thing. When
But is the other session finished? I'm gonna go. Oh, okay.
Okay. So we have like 3 minutes. Okay. What were you just asking me? I'm sorry.
Advocate, agency, finding your voice.
Empowerment. Yes. So I remember when I was out there, you know, and feeling this, it's unhealthy empowerment, right? Because I literally would be like, you know, when this person pays me, it would be like me getting back at what happened to me when I was younger, right? And so there was this false sense of agency, right? False sense of empowerment. But I had to find what I could do to use it, to keep doing what I'm doing and have some sanity, right? So actually no longer having this in my life, right? And finding real empowerment and agency is huge. right? That's why I love choice. That's why I love just sitting, like, I'm good with myself. I have choice and I have agency and I'm empowered. I am a person I have power. I have authority. I have all these things in my world, right? I create, all this stuff. And I'm so good with it, right? But I know that everyone else, they have to figure that out for themselves. And I am not going to force you to do that because that's horrible. That's wrong. Right? So, empowerment is key. I think for many things, that's what we want. But that belongs to me. That's mine. And when I get it, nobody taking that away from me. It's mine. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to have something taken away from you. And I'm not going to be in that situation. So call me the mama bear on that one. Yep. Well, thank you, Melissa. Can you give her a clap? I think she did really good.
Thanks, Tanya.
Are we good? Any other questions? You good? All right.
turn mine down.
Testing. Hey, there we go. All right. Start my timer here. Looks like we've got a thin crowd. Everybody was hungry. So if you're sitting closer to the back, we'd love to have you move forward so we can have a conversation, because I don't want to talk that much. I want to hear what other people have to say, because I think the topic is interesting, but this is not a presentation of any expertise on my part. Yes, and they'll come back. Well, that's fine, because then they'll be here for the discussion, so that's great. Yes, kind of came up. We realized we had a bit of a gap in the schedule. We couldn't fill a workshop, and and looking at the schedule of all the different things that we're talking about, I realized that a lot of the discussion around technology was how can we as organizations use technology in the movement, but we were kind of the piece that felt like it was missing was how do we get make sure that survivors have the opportunity to engage with technology, to build technological skills, digital skills. And then also, as I was doing some research on another project, I also came across the idea of organizational literacy in terms of how we interact with, working in an organization, working within a movement. And there's just different social skills, social competencies, social habits that as you work in organizations, you learn, but then if you haven't had those experiences, it becomes a barrier to actually getting into those organizations. So just a little bit, I'll share just a few slides here. Because I was trying to figure out where this whole topic fit in the context of the US labor force. And so I just was kind of doing some research on technology and labor, different job profiles and different things. So first I wanted to define, we're talking about two things, digital literacy and organizational literacy. So the UN, UNESCO defines digital literacy as the ability to access, manage, understand, integrate, communicate, evaluate, and create information safely and appropriately through digital technologies for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship, which is a fairly broad definition. Department of Education, outside of the US, but still relevant, has decided that digital literacy sits alongside the core skills of learning, reading, writing, and oral communication, and mathematics. And then, interestingly, this ties into the next slide, is that there's currently 1.4 job openings per available employees in the United States as of January of this year. And job seekers can feel comfortable and can feel digitally qualified. If they're comfortable with smartphones, if they're comfortable with social media, email, those types of things, but they can still at the same time have trouble navigating different business tools because digital consumer spaces tend to be more intuitive and more instantly gratifying than business software. Digital workplaces are typically not intuitive and provide a delayed gratification as opposed to instant gratification. More than 75% of US jobs are require medium to high levels of technological capacity. And then the other half of this is, again, organizational literacy. Workplace literacy is the skills employees need to have in order to be successful at work functions and manage the demands of their jobs in a healthy and productive ways. And these can be essential skills and like hard skills, soft skills. An interesting thing I ran across was that 61% of entry-level job openings require 3 years of experience, which makes it, which is a considerable barrier if you don't have those skills and you have to have had that job to acquire that job. List of required skills. But in preparing for this workshop, I had a really good conversation with Sandra about survivor experiences with entering the workforce, maintaining employment, all of those things. And so I wanted to have her share some of her experiences with this.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I have been fired 5 times from the organization workforce. Some of my challenges were, she said, not know how to maneuver through the Microsoft Word. You know, you go for the interview and pass the interview, flying colors, and get hired. You get hired, it's on-the-job training. Only experience I had off the job training was when I was in Germany. I was a military wife, and they sent us away for a week and gave us training. But the on-the-job training, while you train as you go, I found it very challenging because there was I didn't have any background of computer skills and so forth. So that was a big challenge. That was the number one challenge. Another challenge was going in the workforce, being a survivor. Didn't even know what I was dealing with at that time because I just found out like 3 years ago that I was a survivor of human trafficking. All along I was wondering why I was having all these trauma. Didn't know how to identify it, didn't know how to put it together to find out what was going on in my head, what was the anxiety. So getting on the job and don't have the skills after they hire you, and as it says there, 3 years experience. Well, I didn't have any experience. So most of those jobs, I was just hired to come in and to work. However, I remember I was sharing with Bryon a situation in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and being on the job and just laying down my key, my cash box key, and went to the restroom, and I came back, it disappeared. Next thing you know, I was in the office of the manager and being fired, right? So there is zero tolerance for that because that was a no-no. If you knew at the beginning that this was, it's gonna be, grounds of termination if your key was laying around, that was one situation. I had another situation where I was on the job and I was told by my supervisor to go and pick up lunch for a coworker, and I said, my reply was that it wasn't in my job description, so that was insubordination, so I was fired. So upon being fired, I went to the nearest emergency room. I was telling Bryon, and I told the emergency staff in the emergency room I was there to die. And they looked at me strange. I said, well, I have an insurance policy that is valued $250,000, so if I die, my children will be good, but how can I survive without a job? How do we survive out there if we're getting fired repeatedly over and over and over again? And we have children to take care of. I had 3 children to take care of. So if a solution, and we're here now in 2024, and we have these wonderful NGOs here. So glad you guys are here because it's all collaboration who's going to make it happen to assist survivors in, training skills, in communication, computer skills, and so on.
Thank you so much for that. I want to follow up on something that we talked about in our conversation, which was the idea of how long it takes because you were talking about trauma, and how trauma affects how you think, how you are able to learn, how you're able to retain information, build new habits in relation to working in new places and learning new skills. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, first of all, when a person is rescued from human trafficking, the second rescue is getting that individual de-traumatized, because you have trauma bonding, you have a lot going on, you have the anxiety disorder going on. So it's a whole lot is in our head, you know, even now my brain moves, I was telling Byron, like 100 miles an hour if we're not sleeping. So in order, you have to get that individual, before you send them to the workforce, they have to get help being de-traumatized. That is so, so important. And a lot of organizations out there, okay, the resources are here, but the resources are there and you send us out there, but we're not de-traumatized. We're still battling with that battlefield of the mind, where our minds are not clear. We're having triggers. We can identify what is triggers, what is a red flag, what is PTSD, what is depression. I remember going to my therapist for the first time and I got an assessment. And when she finished that assessment, and that was like during COVID, 2020, she said, "You're in depression." And I'm looking at her like, "Really?" And I started crying. And she said, "Well, we're here to work through that." So we as NGOs and organizations, we have to know how to go about getting that survivor assessment, do an assessment on survivor to see that survivor, where their skills are mentally, physically, and how they're functioning, and where are their level right now. Where's your skills level? Is it at a 3rd grade level, a 6th grade level? And to meet the survivor, we need you guys to meet the survivors where they are and work on their weaknesses, build on their weaknesses. That's what we really need.
Thank you. I think, as we're going to transition here just a little bit, because I think we have 45 minutes instead of an hour. So, I think Sandra's talked a lot about why this is relevant in terms of a personal experience, but then from a larger, like a research perspective, workers who lack literacy in a variety of areas are more vulnerable. The extreme pace, as we've been talking about through this whole couple days, the extreme pace of digitization of the workspace is now even putting lower skilled white collar workers into a more vulnerable place with AI, copywriters, digital content creators. One person can do the work of 2 or 3 people now, which starts to marginalize people who don't have those skills and may not have other skills. But then securing in terms of reintegration as well, like how do we make sure that people can get jobs that are not, that require these skills? So I guess we wanted to kind of open up a conversation here in terms of like, what are the barriers to both digital literacy and organizational literacy? From an organizational perspective, I know with Free the Slaves, we're trying to improve our technical capacity. We're not on the bleeding edge of technological skills, but we're desperately trying to get there. But then like in terms of hiring processes for us, like what is non-negotiable in terms of digital skills? Do we have the capacity to train survivors? Do we have the capacity to provide those skills? Do we have access to programs to bring those in if we're trying to hire survivors? Those are kind of things that we're looking at. So I guess I wanted to have that conversation with all of you in terms of crowdsourcing wisdom. What barriers are out there for survivors, for organizations to provide these opportunities to survivors? So we've got a microphone up front here. I would love to hear from all of you. Let's flip the switch. I think it might not be on. Excellent.
All right, so let me see who's in the room. Okay. So I'm actually a survivor myself. So for me, I'm interested in entrepreneurship, and I notice, first of all, it's not easy to find resources. Like, it took me years out when I escaped and everything, to actually know that there's things available that I can use. So, yeah, I feel like the thing about survivors, because everyone have their different experiences, but for me, one thing, but then being able to heal and being able to reconnect with your true identity and who you are, and really understanding what you came into the world to do, and being able to help survivors to, just not even just get a job, but, like entrepreneurship, just resources that they can use. And even for me to say that, that's why I looked at the room, because I don't, it's only because of the space, and it's literally freedom of slavery, that's why I feel comfortable talking about it, but that's just what it is for me. It's the different opportunities that we can have, or that's available.
Thank you. Let me speak. I commend you for that. And I am an entrepreneur, because after being fired 5 times, I decided to become an entrepreneur. And someone had to point out to me where my strong points is in selling, right? So I am very good at selling, because I was trafficked through drug trafficking, and you have to bring in the money and move that money in any kind of traffic. So I flipped that skill and I brought it over into the insurance industry. 2006, I went full-time insurance industry. In the banking industry, I was making $18,000 a year. My first year in the insurance industry, I made $135,000 for the year. And each year, thank you. And each year, it improved and I get better. I'm wearing my ring, and this ring is 4-year leadership straight, top agent, and still top agent. I don't miss a convention. So how did I get there? It's the sales skills that I had, and I was able to take the state license for the state of Florida. I had to do it twice in order to pass the exam, but when I passed it, it was rewarding for me, because now I became my own boss. I can be here right now, and no one is calling me or pressuring me, say, hey, you need to report to work. So I do my own managing of my own schedule. And with my PTSD, living PTSD, it's kind of challenging working in the workforce, because people are bossing you around, and I'm not used to boss, because being trafficked, you are being bossed and told what you need to do and when you need to do it. So I couldn't deal with anymore. I didn't have the headspace to have someone telling me what to do, when to do. But I would say your first step is, my dear, is to find out where your strength is and build on that strength. If it's in sales, then, get into sales. If you are fashion, find out where your strength is. And how I found out where my strength was is right here at Miami-Dade Community College. Back in 1983, they gave me a psychology for career adjustment. And that test took me over into where my strength was, and that was 1983, but I was undocumented, so couldn't get a legal, job, part of my story. But find out where your strength is, build on that strength. And it's easy to find out, what are you good at? What is your talent? What is your gift? Whatever you're good at, that's where you're gonna, and I didn't know there was a room in society for me with my skills, knowing how to sell, would be able in the insurance industry and to compete with male. In my industry is male, and who lead the industry, not male of my color, but there I am competing and being top agent in the state of Florida, lead the company. I mean, it's in you. And I didn't have the opportunity to finish college, but my daughter is a professor at Yale now and the executive director at Yale University. So, parenting skills, yes, I learned that also. So you can do it, and I believe in you, and I want to talk with you. I want to sit down with you to find out where your strength is so we can build on that strength. Thank you.
Thank you.
Empowering, right?
Thank you. I was just, as she was talking, I was going to ask you to talk about that. So thank you. That was part of our conversation a few days ago, and I really appreciate the wisdom there. Anyone else in terms of barriers to digital literacy, organizational literacy? What else is there out there that are? I mean, I guess originally we were hoping that this would be more of a survivor-led conversation in terms of what barriers people feel like they're facing. But we're, I think, facing the lunch crowd, the lunch hunger thing, and people checking out of hotels and a variety of different things. So it's a different mix maybe. But organizationally, I know there's a lot of organizational leaders here. Like, what barriers do you face in helping provide access to digital literacy, organizational literacy opportunities in your organizations?
It's quite dangerous potentially to be using technology in a way where you have a lot of power if you don't have a good understanding. I want to give you an example. Talking about this, but for example, an organization, the human trafficking search that I mentioned earlier, the founders very interested in how much traffic the website got and was really interested, like that was a metric for them, like how many people are we reaching, how many people are we reaching, how many people are we reaching, but didn't really have the technical know-how to understand how websites work, and had like a consultant working for her who literally sold backlinks to the website that are quite dubious, and search terms that were put into Google Search Console that were quite dubious. So actually, when we took over human trafficking search, I found that actually a lot of the traffic were people looking for things that are ironically probably the kind of things that traffickers are looking for, not people who want to learn about how to fight trafficking.
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously we've shut all that down, and it's, of course, then the traffic's gone right down, but that's fine, that's what it's there for. But it was really shocking to find the kind of terms that would bring people to that site. So you have to have a bit of an understanding. It's not just enough to, yes, like visitors, that's a thing. If you're not really understanding, you know, who those visitors are, you're not understanding what a bounce rate is, you're not understanding about time on site, what conversion rates should look like, and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that. That we actually struggle with that as well, in terms of like with Google AdWords and a variety of different things, in terms of we actually have to block some search terms because we don't want to come up in those terms. And I think, I mean, what I heard you say at the very beginning was like technological, digital, like access to technology is not necessarily a good thing if you don't understand the repercussions of things that you're doing with it. And so, and like you're saying, like from an organizational level, if you don't understand, it's hard to then pass that on safely to a survivor, to even people you're training, you know, who are entering the organization. It's very easy to pass on risk to other people as well. Thank you.
Say is that sometimes I think we put the onus of change on survivors or the impacted communities. So I also want to challenge organizations to change in the way we approach who needs to know what is valued in terms of skills, what's valued in terms of knowledge. Because I think at the end of the day, even technology is like what we mentioned here, is sort of like very, very, like, I mean, we don't expect the CEO of my organization to be able to have the same, you know, digital literacy that I do. So we have a different level of expectation of the CEOs than we would do for me. So why should we always expect survivors to sort of like, you know, just meet us where we are? I think we need to change
our model of how we work, who we value. And I think once we sort of value that, there is an on-the-job learning that happens, like where we learn from each other. I think I mentioned the National Survivor Study. We had people that were around the table. We sort of thought about like what perspectives, what skill sets do we need? And we all learn from each other. Even the person that I usually am in awe of, like a sampling statistician, was around the table and really feeling humbled and learning from all around us, from the people around us, and all of us learned together. So I think I'm just challenging us to think about who needs to change, who needs to upskill. It should be the organizations as well.
Excellent, thank you. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation. Is it's not what can survivors do to acquire skills? It's what is collectively, how do we find ways to address any of these gaps, or to decide whether they are gaps necessarily. Maybe there's things that we're missing that at first glance feels like a gap, but there's other things that we're missing in terms of strengths. Like Sandra is saying, do we really understand strengths of people, and how are we able to capitalize on those effectively?
For you, Bryon, great, and thank you for that response. You used the word there, collectively. I remember back in 2014 when I was, I would say, nominated, elected for president of the National Council of Negro Women down here in Dade County, Metropolitan Dade County section. So at that time, didn't know I was, being trafficked or dealing with myself and the issues, but the young lady looked at me and she said, she looked at me and said, you have skills, you do have leadership skills, and you can use your skills in this organization. You know how to fundraise, you know how to collaborate, you know how to network. All that falls over into my 9-to-5 job, right, that I do. However, the key that allowed me to maneuver through that organization was delegation. I know how to delegate. Having 3 kids and raising 3 kids, I know how to get that whiteboard up on the refrigerator and tell each person each day what they need to do. So being a great delegator helped me. However, the downfall, is always a downfall, was survivors, we are trailblazers, right? So taking on, doing things, and teamwork and skills, we're not gonna score high on team building skills and teamwork. Why? Because on my journey, it wasn't about teamwork. It's what you need to do to bring in that money. Everything was one person. You do that, you bring in that money. There was no team building skills. So team building skills is low. So we know that's the skills we have to build on. Conflict management, low, because we weren't taught how to resolve conflict. Another one that is low was how to get along with folks, because as soon as someone says something to us, like make a constructive criticism, I didn't know how to take that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying my best, but it's not appreciative. But those were constructive criticism we should have built on, but because we were broken, we think once you say something, it's a criticism, we think it's bad. We don't know it's good and bad criticism, okay? So those, when I go back and I did my self-evaluation when I finished my 2 terms as a president and find out I had to be pulling with the board, and if the board didn't want to do it, then I'm like, well, I guess it has to get done. So I got it done. It made the organization grew in numbers. I started off with 50 members. When I finished, I had 125 members. In funding, they gave me $10,000. When I closed out, I had $35,000. So moving along, and I can move without you, because going back to say, we were pointed, it's not a team, it's you got to bring in the money. It's all about you have to do this and you to do that. So team building skills. And as we go through these forums and we have survivors on hand. We should have breakout sessions on these things, teaching our survivors how to do team building skills, how to do conflict resolution that will help us.
Sure. I just was going to answer your original question about organizations or survivors working for organizations, and just to say that like international NGOs are like not even a safe place for like people without trauma to work sometimes. There was recently a study from Millennial HR on the pathology of large INGOs and kind of the negative cultural practices occurring within those institutions. So like, I think those institutions need to look internally and grow a lot more before they're really ready to work with like a more diverse group of people, because even people of color like in these organizations are struggling to succeed, I would say, because like of the barriers that are put up within them.
So just to recap, what I hear you saying is that maybe one of the barriers is cultures within organizations, and that we may need to assess whether we're ready to I mean, we may want to hire survivors, we may want to start that process. We may need to actually maybe work with survivors to understand if we're actually a safe place, and we're ready to try that, to hire survivors, to integrate them, just in general, before we actually make the leap. Is that what I hear you saying? That's a great point. Thank you. Jennifer.
I want to push back a little bit on Sarah's statement that businesses need to make things easier to employ survivors, because we're actually looking in many cases at a quite competitive job environment. When I started anti-trafficking work in Greece almost 30 years ago, the labor ministry of Greece presented statistics that there was a shortfall of around 60,000 jobs in the country. So to suggest that it would be easy or possible even to make accommodations to hire people who were less qualified for those jobs than people who actually, Greeks who were unable to find them, was a very difficult proposition. And I think we need to actually tune into those market realities. However, I do think that there are ways for businesses to prepare to receive survivors. And I know we're going to come to resources I hope, at some point in this session. But for instance, the Freedom Business Alliance has a code of excellence for businesses employing survivors, focused on healing-centered workplaces and places where people can come in and potentially succeed. In custom-built workspaces, but in others in very competitive environments. I know that Randstad and Coca-Cola had an initial partnership looking at how do we successfully place people and what kinds of provisions like mentorship allow people to survive in a corporate workspace. There are some excellent things out there. I hope we do get a chance to come to that, because there are a number of good models that we can look at. And I think, Lauren, to your point about INGOs definitely need to look at their own corporate culture and really begin to adopt good standards of practice around their HR practices and employment.
Thank you. And given our short amount of time, that's actually an excellent transition. I think we have about 15, well, it says 10 minutes. We'll try and push it to 15 because I think it's important. I wanted to shift then to resources and strategies and opportunities. What can we do to remove barriers, to better provide opportunity for survivors, for even for people just looking to enter the movement that may not be fully versed in the movement, but specifically, I guess, the survivors, how do we make sure that we have access to tools? What strategies are actually being used out there already? What tools do we have? What opportunities? Start, so let's kick it off there.
Sorry, I was in this space for about 8 years. So there are a number of good models, but there are very few programs that exist, or the ones that do exist tend to exist in specific geographic spaces. In the US, yeah, I would not say it's a global model, but the Rebecca Bender Initiative does have Elevate Academy, which helps people in their professional journeys. Unfortunately, I think it actually is looking mainly at people being employed in the future in the NGO space. And I think that we can agree that that is not a viable alternative or even a desired alternative for the majority of people, is to go on then working in the NGO space. So there need to be other things. Everfree, which is the union of 10,000 Windows and Willow, 10,000 Windows actually has pioneered quite a dynamic training program coming alongside people in that job placement space. And I think we should be attentive to and learning from their experience in that, but I'm not aware of a degree to which their learnings have been published. But 10,000 Windows and Everfree are someone to look at, the Freedom Business Alliance as well. And then there are just some excellent examples of practice from places like Myanmar, of all places, where the Yangon Bakehouse has one of the best job training programs I'm familiar with. It's a 1-year program. Survivors come in, work at the bakehouse, which actually produces superb products. They learn every part of the business, but in the 11th month or the 12th month of their internship, that entire month is dedicated to job placement for those people. And they have a social worker who works alongside their employee trainees, spends that entire month helping them to go through interview processes, to vetting employers, because they're looking for safe employment places for their workers moving on. There are a number of places that are doing a good job and really trying to learn what works in terms of using a workplace, not just as a springboard into a career, but a place for healing to actually happen. So there are a few examples.
Excellent, thank you. Marty.
You asking that? I believe the first thing is respect and treat people with value. Survivors, sometimes there are a lot of survivors, they are professional, and we're dealing with the tokenism problems that people want to bring you at the table. They tell you what to do. They don't respect your knowledge, your experience, your professionalism, and they guide you in what you gotta do, not what you think has to be your way. So I think I have to start with that respect, and of course, what you were saying about to have a team that is trained properly on how to approach survival, how to work with survivors. And if you want to hire survival, just sit with that survivors and explain about the contract, about the project that you want to do. And, this is what we need. Can you do that work for us? And show them, in the contract from the beginning to the end, that's how many days you're going to work, how much you're going to get paid for these. Or get a negotiation like, this is what we're offering, this is our budget. Because we collaborate with a lot of organizations. It's not about the money. It's about working together, but respecting that there are survivors out there, that they are professional, and they deserve to be valued for that.
Respect is always a huge a huge part of any good working relationship. The other thing that I just heard, I guess, kind of between the lines there, Marty, was transparency as well. So excellent point. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hear from Anna because yesterday at her panel she was talking about opportunities that are the grants that you provide for survivors and like just the criteria that you work with and like what makes a successful applicant.
Last 30 years has given, supported over, it just in 1 year supports around 10,000 survivors, usually through grants to civil society organizations like your own in 45 countries around the world. It's not a huge amount of money. It's about 1.5 million a year. These are not big grants, particularly from a North American perspective, but they are bigger grants for other parts of the world where I think a lot of the focus is. There is nothing here specific. It is vocational training, education, income generating activities, legal representation, shelter, food, healthcare. But I think as coming out of this for me, given that there is a huge push around AI and tech at UN Human Rights, one of the things I will take away from these 2 days is to try to connect those two initiatives and talk about what more discussion could be had between supporting organizations in this space in their attempts to both provide opportunities for digital literacy and to increase their own tech components in the organization. So I really see it more as an opportunity. I do think that the trust fund would fund activities like that for organizations that applied, but I'm not sure it's actually being thought of right now. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You mentioned the things that you do. So I wonder, does those grants cover how like task forces, right? That are very important. Like we use them, coalitions or task forces to bring people together. In other countries, are they working in that capacity? Because I know in my experiences traveling around the world and educating law enforcement, it used to be this like, oh, we don't want the service providers in the room. And through my experience, I'm like, the service providers are the most important people in the room. And so does those grants cover how we can teach, other countries how to work together as a team instead of like in these silos?
Mandate of the trust fund to fund things like that. I'm not sure it's been done. But again, I think it's a group of people who are a very small team who are dedicated to the trust fund. And I think it would take a conversation to understand. I think they see themselves as giving to direct provision organizations who are face to face with survivors and those with lived experience. But I definitely think there's opening to that. There are the trustees of the trust fund are all people either with lived experience or who have been longtime activists in the space. And there are two based in North America, for example. And they're also very great people to talk about how could the trust fund be expanded. And just to understand, in case it's a new thing, the way these UN trust funds are funded is through member states, right? So it requires the member states of the United Nations to give money to the trust funds in order for the trust funds to expand. So it's not necessarily a decision of the staff of how big it is. It could be much bigger. And for example, the US gives nothing to this particular trust fund. And I think just the case hasn't been made. And one of the things
I'm going to work on with Bukini and others is to get the US to contribute to the trust fund so the UN can give on a global level more to direct provision organizations. So don't mean to take it off topic, but I think would be an openness to that. I'm not sure it's been done yet.
Told that we're out of time. So, and I think we have a kind of a push to get everyone back around here. Giselle, when do we need to get everyone back here? Okay, so we have an hour and 15 minutes for lunch, which is enough, but it's not a lot extra. There's Mike. Thank you all so much for your contributions and for filling in the gaps that are obvious in my experience, and I really appreciate the conversation. And I want to again express my thanks to Sandra for sharing her experience with us and her wisdom.